morning, everybody. Call the meeting to order. We have a couple of proxies today. I have Mary Dalton's, and I believe Fran has Senator Thomas's.
And I have
That's it. Okay, good. So we, hold on, mark these down. Frank has Fred. And Charlie has Deb. All right, well, we'll get started. I don't see Representative Eli here today. Has anybody seen him? Representative Eli? Okay, well, we'll after the break, we'll see if he shows up. I know he's very interested in our work here. Current status of MDC. So total number of clients with the agreed upon cost and service plans. We have Aware with 18, Benchmark with 15, QLC with 2, and Flathead Industries with 2, giving us a total of 37. Is my math right? Yeah. Of the 52. Total number of clients that were transitioned out of MDC in June, July, August, and September. Aware with 3, Benchmark with 3, and Flathead Industries with 2. Transitioning in October, Aware is scheduled for 5, and Benchmark is scheduled for 6. So another 11 in the month of October. And that again is dependent upon being able to acquire the appropriate number of staff to safely serve the clients. We've closed 3 units at MDC. And as of August 31, $1.5 million has been spent on personal services and $373,000 has been spent on operations at the facility. And if you give me 1 second, I'll get the last metrics report. We had 39.5 vacant positions, 26.5 DSP vacant positions. Overtime actually got better at 88 shifts needed, with 78 filled. And we had no new hires. Obviously, that's in the context of we have not had new hires there in quite some time. And we had 3 terminations over the last pay period. So all in all, placements are going well, and we're actually, from a staffing perspective, in a not where I'd like to be, but better place. So, any questions? Yeah, Representative General.
I think I read in the Helena Independent Record that the notices will not go out now of layoffs until it's delayed, the time frame is delayed.
So we have committed to the employees that there will be no layoff notices prior to, was it October 1st? October 1st, I'll be meeting with the staff today at 1:45 to give them another update on where we're at.
Can you give us a sneak preview?
No. I can email everybody afterwards, but I want to make sure the employees know first.
That's fair, thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Fran and then Eric.
So, Mr. Chairman, the 39.5 vacant openings or 26.5 for DSPs, is that based on the FTE needed for the current census at MDC, or is that number on?
That's on total FTE that are still there. So we've been moving FTE out. For instance, we moved some as they were vacated over to Child and Family Services Division where we needed them. So that's based on allocated FTE.
And how many residents are now? How many clients are still at MDC?
30.
We are currently at 29.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mr. Burke.
I think that was my question. I just want to know the current census and then the current staffing levels that we have at MDC.
So yeah, that answers.
29.
29.
29 was the current. And the DSP number for staffing, do we have that number? How many total?
I don't have the total number. I can get the total number. Actually, does Tammy have it? Where's Tammy?
I think we have 71 DSPs.
Okay, 71. Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, Chairman.
Yeah, Carl.
We have 29 clients still at MDC. We've placed the others that you mentioned.
37.
Yeah, what are we doing then if we get new clients? Is MDC taking them, or are we trying to place them, or what's our status in that?
So we've been working, so we're not taking new people in for two reasons. One, taking them in the front door makes it more difficult to get them out the back, but secondarily, we're worried about staffing numbers and whether or not taking new people in, we have the staff to appropriately serve them. So what we've been doing is we get calls on crisis. I know Rebecca and I and Nav and the team have been working on a case-by-case basis with individual providers, that if something comes up, we go into triage mode and respond into specific to that particular client. So, and Rebecca will walk through in her presentation some of the resources we have to bring to bear on those now, and we've been utilizing those to prevent people from having to come back. Yeah, Charlie.
Just a quick follow-up. So you explained that 29 current in the census here. But you mentioned also, is that assuming the people that are going to be exiting in October, or is that, so
Right, so
that's-
then
that's
29 would
gonna be the-
become,
that's
29 would
the-
become 19, or 18.
Oh, okay, okay, that's what I was thinking, by the end of October-ish,
Yeah.
under 20. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Dawson, BTAC update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Drew Dawson, still, and chair of the Boulder Transition Committee. Our committees continue to focus on opportunities to improve Boulder. The master plan is currently under development, and the BTAC will now hear how that is progressing at its October 12th meeting, and all of you are welcome to attend that. Each of our committees, the Marketing, Recreation, and Attractive Businesses, has been meeting regularly and making good progress. And thanks to the Department of Commerce, the Montana Economic Development Association, each of these committees will soon receive an infusion of technical assistance and expertise from folks with lots of experience in other Montana communities. This should accelerate our planning and identification of resources and implementation, so we're excited about that. Next Tuesday, a number of community members are traveling to Phillipsburg to learn firsthand how they revitalize their community and to get some lessons and tips from them. So I think we're taking about 25 people over to Phillipsburg next Tuesday. So we're pleased that the BTAC, the Jefferson County Commissioners, the City of Boulder, and the Boulder Chamber of Commerce jointly signed a letter to MDC employees expressing our appreciation for their services. If you haven't seen that letter, I would encourage you to go to our website, which is a long website, but easy to remember, www.makingbouldersfuturebright.com. And you can take a look at that letter online. In fact, I would encourage you to look at this website often and to keep up on the activities of all of our BTAC activities in the community. We encourage public participation in all of our meetings and all of our committee meetings, and that includes any of you folks who would be interested in participating. So we think the BTAC process is working well and provides a good opportunity for the engagement of the public as we look toward Boulder's future. There's always more that we would like to do, and we seek continual improvement in our community participation in the process. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll present a separate report from the MDC Repurposing Committee that just met this week. but I'd be pleased to first entertain any questions from the council about this portion of the BTAC report before proceeding to the MDC repurposing committee report. If there are any.
I guess, Drew, just from my part, I really appreciate you facilitating all of these meetings and opportunities for us to get down and hear what folks are saying. I know Senator Keene and I, Commissioner Mullen, have been at most, if not all of them, and it's been a great place for direct feedback. And rumor mills and towns the size of Boulder and Anaconda tend to spin a little bit. So really appreciate the venue to make sure that those are vetted and put to rest as soon as possible. So thank you.
Well, we appreciate all of your involvement, so and any additional involvement that you can have, we would appreciate that as well. So now this will be a report from the MDC repurposing committee. So, Mr. Chairman, the members of the committee, the MDC repurposing committee met on Tuesday of this week. So this report has not yet been reviewed and approved by the full BTAC, but that will happen in early October 12th meeting. However, we thought the council would benefit from hearing the committee's thoughts at this point. So the BTAC's MDC repurposing committee has been working diligently on envisioning the use of the MDC's campus following its closure. Mr. Chairman, we appreciate your participation at nearly every meeting of this committee as well as the full BTAC. And you're keeping us appraised of the administration's activities, responding to our questions, and being available despite your hectic schedule. So your cooperation in our project is commendable. We're also impressed with the work of the MDC Transition Council and with the Department of Public Health and Human Services in complying with the provisions of Senate Bill 411. Despite limitations of time and money, you have made progress in transitioning MDC clients to community-based settings, as we've heard this morning. However, as our committee has looked at options for repurposing the facility, whether for state uses or for private uses, it's been very difficult. And part of the reason it's difficult is we believe there will still be residents at MDC, despite the progress. We believe there will still be residents at MDC when the campus is scheduled to be repurposed. Despite all of the great accomplishments, the remaining tasks still are daunting. And we just don't see how they can be all accomplished by June 30th of 2017. So there are still clients to be placed, and some of the perhaps more challenging clients to be placed, and still challenges with providers accepting the clients. The absence of a facility of last resort is a concern for everyone: families, providers, clients, and the communities. And there have been unanticipated challenges with trying to lease compliant residences for state-operated group homes. This may necessitate the construction of state-operated group homes, something which our community may be able to help with. But this all takes time, more time than is currently available. As we sit through these meetings, our committee, myself, others, we know that everyone wants to do what's best for the clients and that we're all moving in that direction. But it seems that we're all rushed and too rushed to finish our task well. And I say our task because the Boulder community feels very much a part of this and is concerned with the MDC residents as well as with Boulder's future. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, to accommodate the concerns that I have discussed, our committee will be recommending for consideration of the full BTAC and subsequently more formally to you that the Secure Transition Committee be approved as a necessary part of the continuum of care, and that MDC remain open and efforts to satisfy all of the dictates of Senate Bill 411 for up to an additional 2 years. We believe this recommendation is in the best interest of the MDC residents, individuals with developmental disabilities, their families, communities, and providers. This will allow the spirit and the intent of Senate Bill 411 to be accomplished, even if just a bit later than originally anticipated. We would hope, of course, that midway through the next biennium, the future use of the MDC campus would be made known to the community so that proper repurposing could commence, whether that repurposing is for a government use or for a private use. We will convey the final status of this recommendation to you after the BTAC meeting, but we're hopeful that the Council and the administration would seriously entertain this recommendation. The community, of course, would be willing to assist as needed. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Be happy to entertain questions.
Questions of the committee? Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, crisis services proposal. RDC.
All right. So Dan asked me to provide a brief overview of the work that the Developmental Disabilities Program has done towards creating a crisis response system for individuals with both intellectual or developmental disabilities and mental health diagnoses. This is a preliminary plan, and I welcome input from the committee, and please know that there are a lot of details that are yet to be ironed out. As Mr. Dawson mentioned, we've been working with a very tight time frame, so this is what we've come up with, but it's very preliminary at this point. Crisis intervention has, oh wait, actually I have a hand up, sorry. This will help. So crisis intervention has traditionally been the purview of the adult mental health system, but with the increase of deinstitutionalization efforts across the nation, there are more and more individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities living in the community in fully integrated settings, which is a good thing. These folks do have difficult behaviors sometimes, and there does need to be some level of crisis response system put in place. The imminent closure of the Montana Developmental Center has really pushed the development of these crisis services to the forefront of DDP's service considerations. The passage of Senate Bill 411 has elicited many comments and concerns about the safety of not only the residents, but the communities that they'll be living in, and the providers and guardians who are offering services to these folks in the community. So it's a very, very cogent issue at this point in time. Behaviors that would have once been dealt with through an MDC commitment will now have to primarily be handled in the community. So we really need to put together a robust crisis system that will allow these people to, the providers and the caregivers, to manage these difficult behaviors in the person's community placement, because we want to maintain as much stability for these folks as possible. The heightened emphasis right now on crisis services should not be taken to imply that DDP does not currently have fairly significant crisis services in place. And if you look at the handout that you've been given, there's a list of existing DDP resources at the very top. There is a difference, though, in these crisis services and the crisis services that we're proposing to create, and that the services that we currently have in place through DDP are primarily focused on prevention and early intervention. The best way to deal with a crisis, I think everyone is in agreement, is to prevent it from ever happening. So I want to talk a little bit about a couple of the services that we do have available, because one of the things that I think is going to be critical in how we manage crises within Montana and within this population is that we really fully utilize the services that are currently available to us. And as I go through these services, I'm going to talk a little bit about the utilization rates, and you'll see that we're not really doing a great job in utilizing what we already have available. So the first service is the Positive Behavioral Support Services. It's a waiver-funded set of evidence-based strategies used to reduce problem behavior by requiring the administration of a functional behavioral assessment and the development of a behavioral support plan to improve the individual's quality of life. So this is a fairly robust set of services. When we looked at utilization recently, and we pulled the last 2 years of DDP data, we found that only 3% of existing cost plans have funds allocated for behavioral support services. And given what we know about the number of folks in our system with challenging and complex behavior, that's far too low. We also looked at the amount of cost plan dollars that are dedicated to this service that are currently being utilized, and we found that only about 35% of the allocated funds for this service are actually being utilized. Now, the reason for this underutilization is probably complex, and it's something that we're going to be looking closely at because it involves not only the providers, but the case managers and the entire treatment plan team, who really are the ones who make the recommendations on whether or not this is a service that an individual needs. So again, we need to do a better job up front of identifying the types of individuals who are going to need these intensive behavioral support services that are currently available. We also offer providers and family members or caregivers a team of 5 outreach clinicians and specially trained lay staff who have weekly staffings with both our medical director and our DDP psychiatrist, who is currently the psychiatrist at MDC, Dr. McCall. This is the Developmental Disabilities Program Behavior Consultation Team, and they provide telephone assessments, consultation, programming assistance, and they're also available for face-to-face assessments in the individual's home, be it a provider or a private citizen. We have had trouble in the past with having this team be fully utilized. I think that we are making some progress, but some of the data that I pulled that was particularly troubling to me is that when you look at providers' intent to exit folks from their services, and they generally do this when they determine they're no longer able to safely serve an individual in their services, we find that only about 56 of the cases have had consultation with the behavioral support team. So again, a significant underutilization of an already available resource. It does require the provider or the guardian or the family member to be willing to have this team come into their home and work closely with them, and that is something that we've struggled to have happen. We have also struggled with having the types of staff that providers find useful. When we first started, we had primarily master's level staff, and we quickly got the feedback that that providers didn't need a bunch of clinicians coming in. Who they needed coming in was folks who could stay for longer periods of time and help implement the behavioral support plans once they were put in place. So we've adapted to that, and it's an ongoing basis. I think that our referrals are increasing. We've had some staff turnover that I think is beneficial, and it's an ongoing process. But it is a service that we need to continue to really utilize, because these are the folks that come in at the first signs of a potential crisis. So the first signs that this person's behavior is starting to escalate to the point which may eventually become a crisis, we need to get this team in there to stabilize the system before it actually turns into a full-blown crisis. Once an existing level of care is no longer sufficient to successfully manage an individual in their existing environment, a provider may access urgent needs funding. This is funding that is approved when a member in waiver services needs additional permanent funding put into their cost plan to meet their assessed health and safety needs that can't be met through other sources. Now, this is a service that's being utilized very well. In fiscal year 2016, we spent nearly $3 million on increased cost plans to safely serve folks in the community. So we do have a number of services that are available. Again, a little concerned about how often they're being utilized. We often get crisis calls when the crisis is at the point that the person has to be removed from the environment in order to stabilize safely. And we want to be getting these calls way before we get to that point. So that's what we're looking at as far as developing this new set of crisis services, because we recognize as many preventative services as we have in place, we do still need to have some imminent crisis response services available. I did look at what other states are doing, and when you do that, you find one primary national model that really has the same components. You've got a crisis hotline, a mobile crisis team, funded emergency housing options, and then follow-up intervention. And the level that these services are staffed at, both at the professional level and the level of hours available, depend pretty much completely on the amount of funding that's allocated for the crisis service. So for example, crisis hotline, some places have 24-hour a day, 7-day a week, 365 days a year, active crisis services available through the hotline. Other places have had to do only, off business hours, and they assume that the DDP program is able to assess the issue during business hours. So it just depends on the amount of funding you have to dedicate to this particular program. Mobile crisis teams provide on-site intervention, stabilization, and in-home support. And again, this is anywhere from within 30 minutes to some places give themselves 24 hours to respond. Kind of have to ask yourself what kind of a crisis can be responded to in 24 hours. But again, it's all about the amount of resources that are allocated. And when you're talking about a state that's as large and as rural as Montana, then we are looking at the longer time frames for the response, unless you have many crisis centers throughout the state, which is incredibly expensive. The professional staff for these teams varies widely, again, based on resources. There's often a licensed clinical social worker, a board-certified behavioral analyst, and then some specially trained developmental disabilities professionals, because you need the folks who have the hands-on experience, who are comfortable working in that direct care capacity with clients, to accompany the clinical professionals and to stabilize the situation. The mobile crisis teams have two goals. You can either decide that the situation, the crisis, can be stabilized in the existing placement, which is always ideal because it avoids the disruption of removing the person from their home and having to take them and place them elsewhere. It also gives the crisis response team and the behavioral response team the ability to see the person in their home environment, to see the therapeutic milieu, to see the roommates, because a crisis doesn't evolve in isolation. It generally involves all of the components that are involved in where the person is living. So that's always the ideal circumstance. However, sometimes folks have to be removed from their situation, so you have to have some funded emergency housing options available. There's a couple of different ways this is accomplished. You can have standalone crisis therapeutic homes. So this would essentially be a group home that would have usually 4 beds that are available for folks who are in crisis. This is very staff intensive because you don't have any economy of scale. And so using this model is, while it may seem ideal in some ways, it's also extremely expensive. Another thing that communities around the nation have done is contract option. So they contract for beds in larger either behavioral health or hospital facilities, and pay. I know Benchmark pays $50,000 a year to keep a couple of beds open within a behavioral health unit in their community. So you're contracting to keep those beds open and have them available for folks to use as crisis stabilization beds. So what are we planning on doing? Well, we've taken this national model and tweaked it to how we think it could currently meet the needs of our folks who are transferring out of MDC. I do think when you're talking about crises, it's very important to narrowly and carefully define your target population that you're going to be working with, because if you define crisis too broadly, you're going to be inundated with situations that don't necessarily really meet a crisis level of care. If you define it too narrowly, you're not going to be providing the services that you want to provide. So for the purpose of this exercise, we are defining our target population as, we're defining crisis as behavior that it presents an imminent risk to either the individual themselves or to other folks. So in the past, those are the types of behaviors that would have led to an MDC commitment, possibly, or at least the pursual of an MDC commitment. So that is the type of folks that we have designed this program to work with. So very, very, very intensive crisis needs. So we are looking at a crisis hotline. We are going to try initially to do the 24-hour a day, 7-day a week, 365 days a year model. We are envisioning our operators being folks who are working out of the Secure Transition Facility Unit. This is something that a lot of crisis centers do. They utilize staff that are already working 24 hours a day through 24-hour facilities to man their crisis line, so you save some resources there. We anticipate having an on-call clinician for triage, so the initial call will come in and either the trained operator will handle the call internally, or they will refer the call to the clinician who can make the determination on, this is a situation where we need the mobile crisis outreach team to go out, this is a situation that can wait for our behavioral health team to go out tomorrow. So they'll assess the urgency of the situation and then deploy the level of resources that are needed. Our mobile crisis outreach team, we would like to have available again all the time. It's very difficult to staff that level of availability. We're looking at a board-certified behavioral analyst, a licensed social worker, and then some specially trained developmental disabilities professionals to make up the team. The board-certified behavioral analyst would conduct the initial on-site assessment and determine at that point if this is a crisis that can be managed successfully within the existing placement, or this is a crisis that we need to utilize one of our out-of-home crisis stabilization beds for. If the crisis can be managed successfully in-home, that's when the behavior consultation team will be brought in, and they will prioritize this case within their current workload. They'll get in quickly, they'll work with the provider or the family member, put a behavioral support plan in place, and then help the provider implement the plan. If the residential crisis treatment is deemed necessary, the mobile crisis outreach team will facilitate placement at a regional crisis bed, and we will need to have a contract either with law enforcement or with some sort of emergency medical transport to do the transport of these folks, because if they're in that level of a crisis, we will need some secure transport likely to happen. So we're going to contract with law enforcement or a medical support service. And then the crisis bed. So what we're looking at right now with our limited resources is we're looking at eastern and western Montana. And I know that when you start talking about regionalized services, there generally tend to be 5 regions in Montana, and we're only talking about 2. We're dividing the state in half. And this is just because of resources, and because this is going to serve largely as a pilot, because we've never done this before. We have no idea what the level of utilization is going to be. So before we start building crisis centers all across the state of Montana, we really want to have a good sense of how they're being utilized, where the resources, where the referrals are coming from, so we can make informed decisions about expanded services. So for Western Montana, we are looking at utilizing the Secure Transition Facility Unit, which is currently ASU over on the MDC campus. That's 12 beds in a secure facility. Again, that is where the hotline will be operating out of, and it's also where the team for Western Montana will be operating out of. And I think that that's kind of ideal, because then the team will be very familiar with the milieu that is currently in ASU, or the Secure Transition Facility Unit, at any given time, and will really be able to assess whether or not this person in crisis is going to be a good fit for that environment. And then Eastern Montana, this has proven a little more tricky, and we are currently in conversations with Jim Novelli from Eastern Montana Mental Health Center. Jim fortunately has a background working with developmental disability services, and so he recognizes the need for intensive mental health services for this population. So he understands the dually diagnosed population, and he's a mental health professional who's both willing and hopefully able to help us provide this set of services. So the Eastern Montana piece is still very preliminary. We do have quite an intensive set of services that we would like to see provided once an individual is in one of the residential crisis beds. And that's primarily focused around really comprehensive assessment. We sat down with Dr. McCall and had a really good conversation about what she would like to see in a crisis unit and what she thought would be the most useful use of resources and time when an individual is in such a placement. And one of the things that she suggested is really comprehensive assessment, which is pretty obvious, because you need to do a skills assessment and a VOC assessment, all of these things to determine what this person needs to be successful in the community. But she also suggested very strongly that a full medical workup be done on these individuals, because oftentimes folks with these dual diagnoses will manifest medical problems in behavioral ways. And so she wants to have that piece built into the crisis assessment, which I thought, was really a very insightful, smart idea, and comes from all of her years of work with this population. So we want the program at the Crisis Response Center to as nearly as possible, emulate the individual's daily environment, because a lot of times crises will abate when you put someone in a new environment where they don't have a lot of the same stimuli, a lot of the same stressors that are present in their everyday life. And so we are looking at having an active treatment model within these crisis centers. So we would probably be using some sort of treatment model like we've been using at the Montana Developmental Center very successfully for the last several years. And finally, I think the piece that is potentially the most impactful and needs to happen is the systemic involvement of the mental health field with the dual diagnosis field. We can no longer continue to treat these folks in silos. We can't silo the services. We cannot have our mental health centers saying any longer that they cannot work with developmentally disabled individuals because they don't have the resources. We're no longer going to have MDC as an option, so the community needs to develop the resources to work with both populations. And so we're going to be looking at doing a lot of cross-training, a lot of active partnering with the mental health system, and we hope that there'll be, a lot of interest in serving these folks once people realize that they are coming into the system, and we need to figure out a way of effectively managing their behavior so that they can stay in the community. Because if not, we're just going to have an influx of folks at the state hospital, at Deer Lodge, at less than desirable and appropriate placements. So that is the plan. Any questions?
Maybe start, and you may have touched on this while I was out, but as people move into crisis beds, we would require that the provider who sent them to the crisis bed take them back. That it's no longer, here you go, we're done, as the current system is. That there is an obligation on the part of the community provider to serve that individual back in the community once they are stabilized and ready for placement.
Yes, we have had conversations about that. One of the things that we really want to happen at the crisis center is active involvement from the current provider. And we are looking at requiring that to have access to the crisis beds, because many crisis centers across the country have experienced what is sort of unceremoniously known as dumping, client dumping. So they get a client into a crisis bed and then inform the state that they're no longer willing or able to serve that individual. That's how we ended up with the backlog we had at MDC. And so we're really wanting to avoid that, really wanting to work collaboratively with providers so that the individual can go back to their original provider.
Charlie?
Quick question, thank you, Mr. Chairman. When you're talking about the mobile crisis team, I'm sorry, first, I meant to ask you, I didn't get, you were talking, there's somebody you're talking with in Eastern Montana, Jim?
Novelli.
Oh, Novelli, and he's with?
Eastern Montana Mental Health Center.
Okay. What I was starting to ask you though, in terms of the crisis stabilization, mobile crisis team, and I realize you can't, I don't want to tie you down, but are you thinking of like a number of that would comprise the team initially? You described all of this in many ways as a pilot, maybe to roll out for a year or two to evaluate and see what, but what kind of numbers, because we've looked at in the state legislature has looked at trying to expand, the crisis team that you have, and that's not been successful. But
right.
So you have the 5, but are you talking about really a larger, more robust kind of?
Well,
mobile crisis team.
That is the team that you're talking about with the 5 members is the behavioral consultation team.
Right.
So that's the group that works early on when problematic behaviors are arising. So we're not talking about expanding that group. This would
Okay.
be an entirely separate group.
Okay, thank you for
So we
that.
have, prevention, early intervention going on
Right.
with the 5-member internal team we currently have,
Okay,
which is what they've proven to be successful at. And then we would have an additional mobile crisis outreach team for folks who are in imminent crisis.
and any kind of idea of what, you've talked about the kind of professional expertise you need to have, and from, I guess, best practices in other
Right,
states.
right.
Any idea of how large that?
I think it would probably be 4 folks, because you've got your BCBA and your licensed social worker, and those 2 could probably swap out depending on the situation, but then I think you need to have at least 2 specially trained direct support professionals with you in the situation.
Okay, thank you.
Let me go to Representative Wagner, then Representative Dunwell.
I'm wondering how does this take into effect new people who are not in the system yet, the ones that come in from law enforcement or the courts? Does this proposal take that into account?
Right now, the target population that we're looking at is folks who have that level of behavior. So when we look at MDC admissions, we had about 25, between 20 and 25 per year. So that's the population that we're looking at serving.
Thank you.
Representative.
First of all, I look back a year ago, I think this is where we wanted to be. And Rebecca, I just give you and DPHHS a huge shout out. I think this is what we were moving towards as far as sustainable public health improvement for our DD system. And what I hear you saying is that the dual diagnosis, we will work together. So I just am speechless. I know the chair will have trouble understanding that. But I would like to ask that we have a discussion on how we make this happen. What is it going to take? I have a few lesser questions, so thanks. First of all, you mentioned a pilot, and so I wonder what that would look like. And then secondly, you mentioned working together with the dual diagnosis. Has there been any thought, and I know this may be way down the road, but to merging addictive mental health and the developmental disability divisions at DPHHS? Not that we need any merging in a huge department, but just thoughts along those lines.
Well, when I say pilot, I want people to understand that I'm saying pilot in the sense that we're starting with an eastern and a western location, with the understanding that that is probably not ultimately enough to cover all of the crisis need in Montana. But it's where we have to start. We're going to start small so we can figure out what works, what doesn't work. I mean, this is a major undertaking. And I think that we need to have more informed data before we go into creating a full statewide crisis system. So that's what having these sites in western and eastern Montana will hopefully enable us to do, is have a much better sense of what the need is, where the need is coming from. And we've tried to do that somewhat with our behavioral consultation team, and it was very interesting because one of the things we found is when we expanded hours so that there was more of an on-call function, I don't think we've gotten a single call. And that was shocking to us because we assumed the second we went to an on-call feature, we were just going to be inundated. Nothing. So that's the kind of thing that you learn as you go along. Merging, that would be a monster division.
It would. It would.
The nice thing is, my former bureau chief for the Children's Mental Health Bureau is now the administrator for AMDD. She was just hired. And so she and I have a very good working relationship. I think we have a very We've both experienced the difficulty of trying to work cross systems. I know that that's something that she really wants to focus on. So I think that we'll be able to make a lot of progress there.
Thank you.
Commissioner Mullen and Senator Keen.
Question for Rebecca, I guess. Of those 20 to 25 people that enter the gate at MDC each year, do you have any information on how many of those are new to the system and how many are being placed there by a program? Because there's going to be a difference when it comes to dumping.
Absolutely.
Some never had a home to begin with to be returned to, so I'm just kind of wondering what those numbers are.
You know, I can get you the actual numbers just anecdotally. I can say that it was very rare that we would get somebody who had not been in services or that was not known to the system in some way. And generally that situation was the result of an aging family, aging parents who had been caring for a child who had gotten to the point where they could no longer manage that child in the home.
But it was their first placement at MDC?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing.
Yeah, we can pull those numbers.
Senator Keen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm thinking back to the testimony of Senate Bill 411, and it seems to me, I guess my question is we're creating a system, we've eliminated a system, but now we're creating another system. And my concern is, it always was my concern about the financial implication to the state of Montana here. So we say we're saving money at MDC, but we're placing the people out there, and we're going to do it at the same cost. Rebecca, to me, I'm looking at this, there's going to have to be increased costs, and I've heard, pilot program. And what scares me about a pilot program is the next session we come back and, we got a full-blown program, and it's 3 times the money. So could you answer how this is going to work and how the money shift is working?
I'm actually going to defer that to Dan as the budget director.
I remember a point in time when division administrators had respect for the budget director. They're long since passed. So Senator, there is absolutely no way that this system will be cheaper than the current operating system. And I think we've demonstrated that over the course of...
Could you repeat that for me?
You're new. I've said it about 1,000 times. Some of the cost analysis that you heard in testimony was that it's cheaper to serve people in the community. Well, that's because the folks that were served in the community prior to the closure of MDC were not at the acuity level that folks at MDC are. So you have folks with a low threshold for acting out. You know, they're not as violent. They don't have as many problematic behaviors who are served in the community currently. Obviously, you don't need the staffing levels that you would for some of the folks who are at MDC that will now be served in the community. Where we're at is about a push between operations of MDC and placement of individuals in the community. So what it would cost them to serve at MDC is about what their cost plans going out into the community is running. This would be in addition to those costs. Then if the state were to get into the, when the state, I won't say if, I'll say when the state enters the community group home realm, we will be operating under that same cost plan structure that all of the private providers currently operate under. So you'll see that as I don't want to say an increased cost, but another general fund obligation. And then finally the waiver 2 services. That's an expansion of 50 slots that are currently not in the system that will be more cost and more service intensive than the current waiver system that's in place. So I'll say it again for you, there's absolutely no scenario where it's cheaper in the new system than in the old.
Thank you.
Mr. Burke?
Mr. Chairman, along those same lines, Senator Keen took some of my thought process, turned it into a question. I'll keep it going. Is there going to be a budget proposal within the governor's budget for this level of cost? And if so, do we have an estimate of what that cost would be for this kind of crisis program around the state?
We're still working on cost estimates. I've got a ballpark of what I'd like to see it come in at based on FTE costs. I mean, we've got under the broadband system what a BCBA costs, what DSPs cost, what those. So I know the staffing, the hotline, it's really the technology piece that I've got a lot of question marks on. What does it cost to have that sort of technology at MDC? I mean, as I've told all of you before, the operations of Riverside are completely dependent on the operations of MDC because all of the technology for Riverside is across the river centralized in one hub at MDC. So keeping the ASU as a repurposed STF is critically important to this component as well.
Sure.
Not only does it operate the 12 western beds, and 12 and 4 is the number because that's where the people are, so to speak. If you look at the intakes as we did when we began this process into MDC, they're primarily coming out of western Montana. So having those 4 beds, hopefully with Eastern Montana Mental Health, will help us alleviate some of the pressure in the east.
Last follow-up on that, but safe to assume that something like this would be part of a package that's prepared as part of the administrative proposal to the legislature?
Yes. Tara.
Rebecca, thank you for all of the great work as always. Can you talk a little bit about how you see the crisis beds interplaying or not interplaying with the state-run group homes and maybe, I wish I could think of another phrase besides place of last resort, because but could you talk about how you see those working together as filling a need that the private sector might not be able to fill?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, while we do intend to work closely with providers who are utilizing the crisis beds and ideally transfer the client back to those original set of services, we're not naive enough to think that there is not going to be the scenario where a provider is unwilling or truly unable to serve this person safely. And I think at that point, we would look at using one of the state group home beds because we probably wouldn't have any other options at that point. Generally, when a client gets to the point of escalating to the point where their community placement is jeopardized, there are not other providers who are standing in line anxiously waiting to serve this individual. So we foresee some of the state beds serving that role. I think also another interesting idea for the role of the state beds is they could potentially serve as somewhat of transitional beds. So working with the individual in the crisis, stabilizing the crisis, and then transitioning them into a state bed to demonstrate that they are ready to come back into the community, that if you put these measures in place, they will be successful in a group home, and then hopefully having more interest from providers at that phase of the work. Thanks. Okay.
Commissioner Seelstad.
Well, I think you answered some of my questions there about those individuals that simply could not go back to the community. And when you say mental health centers need to have the resources to deal with the population, what are we talking resources? They're
primarily it's cross-training. So, oftentimes we will, and this happens quite a bit in behavioral health stabilization units, we will try to get a DD client admitted, and what we are told is that the mental health professionals there do not have the expertise to work with the developmentally and intellectually disabled population. And that's not acceptable in this system, because there's no longer the silos that have existed. MDC was a huge silo, and we served that role of providing mental health services to the dually diagnosed. There's no more MDC, so we need to be able to absorb those services within the community.
So when you say cross-training, then how is that gonna happen?
I have no idea. I have no idea.
And the cost to the mental health centers?
No idea.
I think some of that would come out of the Title 20. What do I deal with so many titles? We have federal funds that are available for training that we can make available to mental health centers for that. I think as we begin, we'd start with Eastern to absorb those two, East and West, one being in Boulder, one being in Eastern Montana, get that up and running. And that again harkens back to the pilot conversation, see what works and what doesn't with Eastern and Western Montana, and then rise all ships after that once we've been able to fine tune those.
So follow up then, if I may, you said that community providers, excuse me, have to take them back if they place them, but if we haven't got the training in place to do all that yet, and we're starting out with a pilot program, then what happens?
So the community providers would already have that training, so that would be...
They're already
doing it. So, for instance, if Fran has someone go into crisis that she needs to send to into Boulder in the secure transition facility, then there would be a requirement that she take that person back once they're stabilized.
Yeah, I'm talking about the mental health centers though.
So the mental health, that would not be an impact on the mental health centers. That would just be on those people who are providing the service.
They're not originating from the mental health center.
Right. So let's just work our way down. Mullen and then Sadowski.
Just thinking about it, first a question for Rebecca. You talked about state beds again. We don't have any state beds yet, right?
Right.
When are they going to be designed as part of the system again? To serve that tough individual that has no other place to go and is unwanted by any provider. If that's a state bed, it doesn't exist today. That has to be developed, built, whatever happens, that's going to take a period of time to get that done. To me, it just sounds like, going from what we had over here at MDC to a crisis system that's going to involve mental health crisis facilities and the SDF over here, it seems like a bit of a step down in terms of the quality of services that were being provided. My question on mental health crisis facilities, my understanding is that they're extremely short-term. They're managed by the mental health centers to be short-term crisis services. I'm not sure short-term works for our people. Are they willing to tie up their beds for a longer period of time in order to serve our tougher DD folks?
That's part of the conversation that needs to be had. That's been part of the resistance and part of the inappropriateness of using existing mental health crisis beds is that they are designed to be very short-term, 7 days, in and out, med adjustment, and that's not what works for the DD population. So we will have a very different model operating out of the Secure Transition Facility Unit, and then we will work with Novelli and Eastern Montana Mental Health Center to see what we can negotiate as far as length of stay.
So STF is going to be a treatment facility in addition to being a more hardened correctional type of facility?
And a lot of times when people go into the level of crisis that we're talking about serving, they benefit strongly from that level of security.
Do you know what the cost is on the mental health crisis facilities?
The cost for?
Cost per day?
No.
I think it's fairly high.
I'm
I thought
sure.
it was like 600 a day or something in that range. And
Well, we pay for-
I don't know if there's anyone from the mental health community that could answer that.
We pay a
Pretty
lot
expensive.
for empty beds. We pay to keep a bed vacant and open, so when they're needed, they need to go in. And one of the questions I've been thinking about on my 12 and a half hours of driving every week is are the incentives in the right place? By paying to have those beds open all the time, that's an incentive. I think you could easily interpret that as an incentive to just get people to Warm Springs. that you're paying for a mental health bed, the cost is there. If that bed's empty, your costs and fixed costs and variable costs are lower. Get them to Warm Springs, you're still getting a contract bed, you're fine. So the question becomes, should we adjust that rate to be on a for a day served as opposed to just paying for that bed to exist? That, I don't think that aligns the incentives appropriately. Anyway, Fran.
No, go ahead.
Are you sure? Thanks for putting this on paper. I think it's something that we as providers and the department have been talking about for quite a while. I know the committee that both Ken and I sat on with, and Jean, I think you were there as well, with the current crisis team, the behavior consultant team. I'll do the right terminology so we don't get confused. Structures a lot that we talked about as, I don't think we had a hotline in there, so I think it's a nice addition, but we talked about crisis teams and then crisis beds. A couple of things that we talked about in our committee meetings were some telepsychiatry services outside the state of Montana, because I think that's one of the issues with most communities is the psychiatry here does not understand the developmental disability population. And so I think that might still be, even though it's on this and we've all identified it, we don't have the professionals in state for that. So there might be a way to we do some telepsychiatry that might be a little cheaper, that will work with the primary care physician and have more of the expertise to have a quicker outcome that we're desiring. So that might be one. The other thing we talked about in our committee was the crisis beds that, you know, we currently have beds open and just kind of for the record, we at MDSC is not opposed to serving more people, especially folks from MDC, since over 60 or 70% of my population came from MDC, is that we don't have staff as well, as Dan and you've talked about for MDC. So, you know, it's that perpetual where we get bodies to support folks who need those supports. But one of the things we talked about in crisis beds, because we all know that brick and mortar is expensive and that you're not always going to have people in the brick and mortar, so it sits there and we talked about how long, you know, how much are we paying for an empty bed. So we actually talked about, is there a way to say, well, at my facilities I have a 4-person home or I have a 3-person home, do I move them into my open beds, and does that right then becomes a crisis unit because it's already a standing, you know, and then there's a, and not just saying MDSC, but just in general. So it's not a new facility, it's not something else, it's already there. There's, you know, people who have the expertise. I think one of the great things about the new crisis services that has been missing, and we talked about it at ours, is that you need to have the elevated DSPs, folks who actually are working, so I'm glad to see that's part of this plan, and I'm assuming you probably Connie was probably involved with these conversations someplace. So I think it's something that even if MDC was not closing in 2 years, or whatever year it is supposed to be closed, this has been a part of our full system that has somewhat been missing. So I don't know, I mean, I've been working as folks here for 26 years now in the state of Montana, that it's not that we're adding new components because one's going away. It's been a component that should have been here for many, many years. And again, like changes happening federally and whatever, it's like it's the closure in Senate Bill 411 is pushing us to address it. So it's not that it's never should have been here or it's coming in because of this. We said before in this committee, I've said it before, you have to look at the whole continuum of care. And people sometimes go into crisis, and I think, you know, I appreciate, and I think for most part, and I'll speak on myself, when we have people go into crisis, and years ago, I did have somebody committed to Warm Springs, court ordered for Warm Springs, and I had to go testify to say, oh no, we want her back. And they're like, when you do? It's like, oh yeah, we want her back. We're just having, she's having some issues that we can't do in a group home. So I will speak on behalf of myself and for providers that we don't want to dump. We want to make sure that when they do come back, that the level of care is there and the skills are there. But I also think you have to rely on the team of professionals. There might be some people who just are not going to be successful in either that location or that particular group home or what, but where would they be successful? So I'm glad to see it's in here. I just wanted to mention there's other two components that, as you said, this is a preliminary that we can have further discussions about of how to keep costs down, but having the outcomes. And I think that's the important part, is looking at the outcomes and not where we are now and what's going on and who agrees and who doesn't agree, but the outcomes for the people with developmental disabilities, for them to have the quality of life that we're all tasked with.
So were you suggesting that we could possibly use an empty bed within one of your existing group homes as a crisis bed?
Yes.
So my concern about that, because that's something that
and I think there's something, you still have to talk about that, how's that work, but, is there a way to do some of that stuff?
Right, because I guess my concern would be bringing in a crisis into an already existing milieu, and one that's supposed to be, it is these people's home.
Right.
And just the appropriateness of that.
And we, in our discussions, we said, well, how would that look? I mean, some of us, like I have a home that has a basement, bedroom, bathroom, so if the person's ambulatory, could that work? Or I have a 4-person home, but I only have 3 there, but I have 3 open beds. Does that house then become a crisis center because it's already there?
Right.
So I think it's those kind of discussions of how can we maybe look at things that keep costs down. It's still in a larger regional area for supports, but I think that we still across the state have issues with the psychiatric component of understanding. But I know Connie knows people and others who have met folks across the nation going, they are experts in the DD psychiatric field. As far as, the mental health and DD, what we have come across and why we, when we had a person go into a crisis and we couldn't get them into to the Providence Center, was that many people with developmental disabilities are nonverbal. They lack really good communicative skills of expressive language. Receptive, they know it. Expressive in different ways than verbiage they can do. So that came to a part that I think when you're talking about the disconnect is that they weren't able to participate in group therapy. So they were not a candidate. So I think those are those breaking down the silos of saying they're different people, but they have mental health issues. So we have to think differently how to have that treatment and an outcome.
And they have the right to the mental health treatment.
And I know, like, I don't know if you're, if I believe St. Pat's is building a 64 new bed, and that might be the time we start talking to them now if we need future. It's not started yet, but I believe it's 64 new beds.
So Rebecca, if it comes to the mobile crisis team coming in and determining that the client needs to be moved out of the home they're in, do you have any idea of the time frame you're looking at before you would ask the provider to take them back?
So once they're in the crisis bed and they've been working with the staff, I think that's going to be individualized. And I don't think we will know that until we actually get in and start doing the work. I will tell you that in my conversations with Dr. McCall, she gave me the very alarming estimate of 60 days. And that's
another thing, requiring or provider involvement. When you say requiring provider involvement, or just requiring anything, requiring them to implement a plan that the DDP behavior consultant team puts together, in the preventive stage. Can you require a private provider to implement those plans? Can you require a private provider to take a client back?
we would need to look at our contract.
Okay. who pays for the private provider to say Fran has someone in this crisis unit? Who is going to have the cost of her DSPs coming to that crisis place to receive the, what do you call it, the training, the coordination that you're trying to get? Who is going to pay for the travel costs and the time costs of her staff to be there, and how is she going to run her agency with staff?
Those are those fine details.
Fine
The
details.
devil is in the details.
Okay, so, well, I'm just,
But very good and very difficult questions.
yeah, so I guess my feeling is that from my very limited experience, not in years, but in number of clients, when a client is in crisis to where you're looking at calling outside your provider, you have tried everything. You usually have brought in the consultation team, but you're having these meetings and everybody's aware of it, and you're working to try to make it happen. So a lot of times you've tried everything, and by the time you're having a crisis, you are done. That's been my experience. And even Alan Bergman, who Mary Cafaro brought in with this, what was it, the best, he came in with a public education series 6 months ago, Best Practices in Community Services. He said that in the crisis, you do have to do this training of DSPs, but he said 80% have to change residences. And I remember Larry Noonan here saying that a lot of times when you have dealing with crisis in his group homes, very often, and he has enough that he can do this, but he switches residences. But you are absolutely right. When you have a client who was maybe not that too easy to begin with, but he's having even more difficulty, the provider's, he's not in a place where he can be placed. So I don't know how to fix that. I mean, that is why the backlog happens. That's, but I can see the STF or whatever that thing is over there now being backlogged the same way. And I guess, yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I'd like to hope that all these things can work. I think they're a long way from being sure if they will work. And meanwhile, I've got a boy over there who is now in ASU because his behavior has deteriorated. He's moved 5 times in the last 5 months at MDC. He went from his home in 2 to 1. No, he went to 6, then he went back to 2, then he went to 1, then he went to 3. And I mean, if you moved 5 times in the last 5 months, you would maybe be acting out a little too. Now, you know, he needs, MDC has shown us, even though it no longer exists, it has shown us what works with this clientele. And I just hope we're going to use that as we move forward. What they don't need is to be moved around when they're in crisis. So I guess that's my problem with this whole crisis model. The is that moving them somewhere else generally doesn't make it better, and then when you put them back, I don't know, I just don't know that it'll work. But you can give it a try. But the other thing I want to say, you were wondering why you don't get the calls, why the money's being utilized, but not, you don't get the phone calls. Well, if you look at all of Sean's aggressive incidents or crisis incidents in his therapy reports over there, which I do, most of them are under 90 seconds. You have to deal with it. These providers, I mean, correct me, all you providers, you are dealing with it because you have to. There's nobody you can call and come in and fix it. You've got to fix it, or the police fix it.
Yeah.
And I guess, sounds good, I just don't know if I feel like it's going to work. So I guess I have real concerns with the moving, with whether you can require a provider to implement. Generally, that home just isn't working for that client, period, and a new home has to be found when it reaches that level of crisis, is my experience. So.
Well, and, you know, ideally, we will manage as many of the crises as we possibly can within the existing placement. because as you
And
mentioned,
the prevention in those programs.
yeah,
But can you, if you come in with if you have your consultation team, your DDP behavioral consultation team, does these assessments, they develop plans, administer assessment, who implements the plan? The provider?
the provider.
Are they required to implement that plan?
No.
Okay, well, I have a problem with that.
Well, can I make a comment on that?
Hold on, let's get to Representative Wagner, then we'll come back.
And I've got one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a little concerned about like she was just discussing, some of the requires, and the require return, I have a little concern, requiring a provider to take them back. I'm a little concerned because usually, many times the crisis is a violent outburst against another client. So returning them is gonna have a negative effect if they're in the same housing area or community that has the other person who this violent episode was acted out on. It's going to have a negative effect, and it also tends to promote the reoccurrence of the behavior because it's a learned, I can get this person to react kind of thing. So, more of a comment, I'm really concerned about that requiring the provider to take them back, especially if they're a smaller provider who can't rotate them to another house, along with Carol's concerns, and I guess I just want to make that comment. I'm a little concerned about some of these requires.
I think the state will no longer have a role. We're out. And as the state steps back with less MDC presence, it's on the providers to coordinate the system. Because we get simultaneously told by the state, you shall not be everything to everybody, but at the same time, you shall be everything to everybody. And I've been dealing with Rebecca for a year.
Dealing with?
Coping with Rebecca for a year. And as we've had crises arise, either at MDC or in the community, I wish more people use the BCTs. I really do, because when we finally get the call, it's the call after they're in a hospital. And as I look at all of the incidents that have come up, it's after the cops have been called, not in the 3 months ahead of time as they had multiple 90-second incidents. When it's not hard to identify a trend. If you see multiple 90-second incidents over the course of a month or 2 months, we need to be engaged, and I completely agree with Carol. One 90-second incident does not a crisis make. But 2, 3, 4 in that same setting, now we've got a conversation, and the BCT should absolutely be engaged at that point. But the BCTs are not being engaged. I mean, the last 2 crises we've dealt with was after the cops were called, after they were already in a hospital.
Why aren't they being engaged?
That's not our call. We receive the calls. We don't make them.
I'm not asking you.
Yeah.
I'm asking, can you providers answer that question?
So
What's the
Let's
problem
go to Fran here.
What was I going to say? Something I'm so very intelligent, I'm sure.
Why would providers, or you specifically, not call the DDP behavior consultant? I heard one answer from Rebecca. You really don't think they're much help. I'm assuming you take care of it yourself and you feel you can take care of it yourself. So why?
I prefer not to say this out loud, so
Okay.
I've had the conversation. Every region's
Well, that
different.
answers the
Every
question
region's
very well.
different, so, right now, we haven't been able to, ours is out for a medical reason or family reason, so it's been difficult of having someone come in, because we do have a call out. So that's our region right now, who is our consultant, so. But I was gonna say something about the requirement of programs. When it gets to, again, I'll speak on how I believe it all works in the DD system across, but when it gets to, you're bringing a behavior consultant team, to me, then you're just looking at that person's expanded program support team, or PSP team. And when a program is developed, we do implement that program. It's a team decision of how to, what kind of components you need in that program, what kind of training, what kind of data you're going to take. So, I don't know if you say it's a requirement, I guess I just think it's an understanding when you're consulting, when you're bringing just one more person in the team, because it's not like you're out of the equation as a provider, they're just another person in the equation
Right.
for that particular individual, so that plan is
So you're saying
implemented.
you always do implement?
If we have we work with a different group of people. We work with the BCBA in Missoula, because we had the funding for some of our clients to do it, and some clients don't have, and that's when we have clients without BCBA dollars attached, and it's getting pretty technical here, then we consult with the state BCT team. If they have a BCBA dollars, then we generally utilize a BCBA in the community. And that person's just another extension of the PSP team then within MDSC, and then we implement those programs. So, I mean, that's kind of how I look at it as like it's not a requirement, I just think it's just what we do, because it's another part of the team.
They're not
For
all
that-
like, they're
for
not
that
all like
client.
you, Fran.
And, yeah, so.
Charlie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I wanted to say I just really appreciate the effort and the thought that's gone into this. Appreciate also the time and consideration to look at best practices, coming up with these components that you've identified of what seems to be best practices in other states and what's been successful. I'm trying to build that into this structure, with whether it's the crisis hotline, the mobile crisis team, and ultimately perhaps placement in a crisis bed. I realize that's more of a last resort. I mean, you're not trying to move people into crisis. Some of the other questions, that's when there's not other options. And so you're trying to put together an array here on, I guess, kind of a continuum of crisis. And so I think this is a good outline, and I realize that's what you're describing it as, and the fact that you're working with the budget office, looking at how do we put this in place, for 1 to 2 year to get it started, and then going from there. One of the things that you mentioned though was, and I think we have heard in certainly from the chairman and presentation previously about the state-run group homes, and you mentioned that that's an important component of this kind of state crisis management and management of difficult behaviors. So I'm just wondering if we can get, whether it's from you as the division administrator, the status of that, of moving toward those creation of those homes. I realize, I think the last time we heard that none have been formulated as it was a couple months ago, but I don't know if you're making progress there.
We have looked at a number of facilities or homes, 5 I think is the total number, primarily in Boulder. We looked at one home in Helena, and none of them really meet the needs structurally or space-wise for the type of population that we envision serving in those homes.
Are you talking about security as well?
Hardening primarily, because we can't have a secure group home, but the hardening, a lot of times these are manufactured homes, and so they're not necessarily built to the secure, or the hardening levels that we would need to really serve these folks. Another thing that's challenging.
Like the ASU has in terms of furniture and.
Right, and then the walls, the material that the walls and the windows are made of. And another thing that's challenging with this population is they generally are very staff intensive, and so you're not looking for enough space to accommodate 4 clients. You're looking for enough space to accommodate 4 clients and all of their attendant staff. So, and you need space. There's nothing more agitating than not having space.
I would have to agree with you, because opening the last 3 homes have taken 12 people from MDC, and we had to purchase existing homes because of the timeline, and we didn't have any new dollars. It's been difficult at best. It's a lot of redoing the walls. It's a lot of redoing the windows. It's not enough space. but somehow we have to continue making it work because there's no other option now. So the place they live is also relates to this assessor they're going to have.
Absolutely.
And so I will contest to that. I agree on that. I wanted to make one other comment.
Hold 1 second on the group homes, Charlie. I think it's also important to remember the states have their statutory obligations that private providers are not. So we cannot do anything over $150,000. And finding a home for $150,000 without a specific appropriation, we have to then get into a lease situation. And finding a facility or a home that is made of 2x4s instead of 1x2s, and then has, that we're able to go in and do some of the retrofits to the windows so that it's a break-proof glass or things like that, within the confines of $150,000 is, if not impossible, very, very difficult. But you have to find that entity who will carry the paper for you. And we just don't have that at this point in time. So we're trying to get creative and see what that may look like, but the statutory obligations we have that private providers don't or conflict with our ability to go get a group home sooner rather than later.
I appreciate you clarifying that, and that's an important piece.
Do you have space available at the State Home in Lewistown, Dan, or is it all?
It's all full. We've got either our Alzheimer's and dementia, or we've got the infirmary.
Yeah.
I was just going to mention, next month I'll be attending what we call our 6-day summit for the region, CMS region. And as I mentioned, I think earlier in our beginning of our committee meetings, that Colorado they looked at closing their state institution, but they did not do that. They're having a pilot on a crisis mobile team for services. It's really just up and new going, but I would be willing to bring back what they have learned, even in the short term.
That'd be great.
And what they see is working or not working at our next meeting.
Yeah, they, I think started this year and are going to start collecting data in 2019, so they have funding through 2019. Yeah.
Rebecca, you mentioned active treatment during the day for individuals in the crisis beds. I'm wondering, just how cost effective is it? If we're going to have, I don't know, a couple, 2 or 3 people maybe in Miles City, maybe a couple, 2 or 3 people here in Boulder that are in crisis beds. It just seems that we've completely lost our economy of scale, obviously, and over time, it's not going to be very cost effective if we add, 2 or 3 more crisis facilities around the state. It just seems like over time, we're going to be back to having the same number of state beds scattered around the state as we have down the street here. It's just going to take a period of years in order to get enough providers that don't want that individual return, that the state's going to have, several group homes around the state that are replacing the beds that were just down the street here.
Well, at the same time that all of this is going on, I think we also have to be very, very active in not only bringing in providers who are willing and able to serve this population, but bolstering our existing providers' ability to work with this population, because we do get calls from providers that are characterized as crises that we should not be getting calls on. We get calls where this is part of the provider's job, is that they can deal with these behaviors. And we, as the program, need to do a better job of getting the providers the resources that they need to be able to deal with some of these more challenging behaviors in the community.
Fran?
Okay, one more, and then I think I'll try to be quiet for the rest of the meeting. I said I wasn't going to say anything. But this part is near and dear to my heart, because it's so really client focused. And so I appreciate the discussion that we're having. I think I said earlier in one of the committee meetings, somewhere along the way, not every provider can be everything for everybody. And we have this thing called choice in CMS, but we don't have unlimited choices in our lives. And I think you have to have choice of where you may want to live in a community, but I don't know if every provider has to do everything, because that's where we see the failures. Because I too wonder, gee, you know, who I serve, who are still at MDSC, they're not an easy population. They are not an easy population. But we still serve them. However, when you talk about prevention, 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 I think those are the three key words on this proposal. And I sit here and I think, okay, how much is this middle bullet going to cost us? And if we say, wow, if we really put that resources into providers who are currently serving that population, you bolster the training for those DSPs and for your managers, you bolster, well, we've all talked about the rate and the rate reimbursement structure, because that's limiting as well on all providers. Can you not do away with crisis services, but can you certainly shrink it? And I think that might be something that we really should really truly have a discussion about, of how to identify current providers who are having a population that is in that harder category. How do you, and do those become the, I mean, it's hard to do all intensive services, all behavioral services, because we're about there. And it's taxing. But it goes down to the training, it goes down to the funding, it goes down to getting the right people, the right education, the right background, the right mindset to do this work. But maybe it's a way you can shrink the need of your, you know, you probably can never get rid of crisis, because I said before, we probably need to have something in place all along. But can you whittle it down there? And I think it's a discussion to really sit down and talk about, and not this pool committee, because not everybody has the same interest in or knowledge base. So,
Well,
you know.
when I look at this, and you look at 16 crisis beds and a waiver of over 2,500 statewide, I think we are shrinking the number, the crisis system. The crisis system will be less than 0.1% that we're talking about, because I think the premise of all this is when providers take a client and they're providing those services, the ideal world for me is the state's out of it. You have a cost plan, you have a service plan, it's being implemented, that client is okay, the provider is providing the services necessary, everything's okay. And in the absurdly high number of people, that is exactly what's going on. They're in the community, they're getting services, and everything's going well. We used to have a system where there were 52 beds for crisis. We're moving into a system where there will be, under this proposal, 16 beds for crisis. And that money's moving, I think, in some extent to exactly what you're talking about. More beds for, offered by the state, frankly, for community group homes, because again, that's the only place where we can define the terms of engagement. We can't tell a provider, do an application to Deanne for Title 20 funds to provide for more intensive DSP and managerial training. We can't tell a provider to do that. The provider has to do that on their own. We can tell our group home managerial staff, absolutely. And I think to the extent, friend, private providers determine that they want to do exactly what you're saying, it will lessen the number of state-operated group homes that will be necessary across the state. But from our perspective, we cannot have a system where there are 16 crisis beds, the BCTs aren't being utilized, training dollars are left on the table at the end of the fiscal year, and we still don't have homes for the folks that need them. So I guess what the state-operated group home concept is exactly what you're saying. And maybe we should have done a better job of explaining it that way, because if we can have more intensive community group homes, we will have fewer needs for crisis beds. But we cannot tell you as MDSC, here's the training you must receive in order to receive this more difficult clientele, because you have the choice to serve them or not. The state will never have that choice. So I totally agree with you. I totally agree.
And I think it goes back to what Rebecca says. We need to look at bolstering the providers in the community, and how do we do that so that we don't have crisis, or we mitigate some crisis, or what people think is a crisis is not a crisis.
Well, and
Because is that, you know,
Waiver 2, I think, is also going to serve a very important function in allowing our providers the flexibility and the reimbursement that they need to serve this difficult population. So we need to consider that into the equation when we're having this conversation as well, because that's the population it's designed for.
Commissioner.
Just real quick, Mr. Chairman, you mentioned that the crisis capacity was a little over 50 beds. Isn't that overstating it just a little bit, since there were about 20 to 25 people that were ready to be placed for 2 years? I mean, isn't the number actually smaller than that 50? Isn't it closer in the 30s or in the 20s probably?
Well, for the time being, I think, yes, your point is well taken, that there were folks who were on the port list that were not being served. We were able to move them into the community under the existing rate structure and the existing sort of how the world works, 0208 comprehensive waiver. So if you were to take them out, you'd be in that low 30, high 20 range, absolutely. That's absolutely fair.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I guess I'm wondering what you and the governor need from this committee to move forward. Would it help to have a recommendation that we support this plan, with the proviso that we do have adequate resourcing and funding, because as we know, our investment in human capital yields an incredible return on investment. So I'm wondering if you need a recommendation saying we recommend we move forward with this crisis plan, stressing prevention, making sure we can bolster community providers within this particular time frame. We start here. Who's going to implement this, who's on first, who's on second, what will our milestones be, and at what point will we end up with this plan, which is our goal, maybe even enhanced, including monitoring and evaluation. So do you need something from this committee to help us move forward?
I think a motion adopting this plan as an outline for services would be helpful. I think it's important to remember that this committee is not a monitoring committee. That will be done by other committees of the legislature and the executive. And the other part is, timelines on this are very nebulous. And I know that's not the answer the committee wants, but it's the reality of having $0 to implement this plan. The fact that we've been able to move as many people, more people than ever before in the state's history into community services with $0, I'm very proud of. So I'd ask for some give on a timeline, because dollars for these will have to be appropriated in the 2017 legislature. What that turnaround will look like is very, very different. Let's say we get the dollars first thing upon sine die in late April. It'd have to be, couldn't be in House Bill 2 because that's for July 1, 2018 through June 30, 2019. So it'd have to be in some other form of legislation, and it would still take us time to stand it up. So timeline-wise, I'm very, very nervous about. But adopting this as the outlined recommendation of what a crisis system would look like would give us what would be very helpful in preparing the budget. Because the other thing about, Fran, when you talk about the next meeting, at some point we have to come to the acknowledgement that there is no more tomorrows. Budget is due in 53 days. That's 53 days for the governor to look at every element of it, to us to update revenue estimates, to go through everything else, and then still go forward. So I say that at some point there will be no more tomorrows. Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm just wondering what the committee thinks.
Fran?
as the provider representative and seeing this for the first time, and even though there's lots of components that we've all been talking about, do we have to say, let's adopt this, or can we say we'll continue, this is the framework of, and really having more discussions with provider groups and talking and hashing this out, because it's kind of our milieu of what we do, but it's the, you know, my mind is like racing of all these things that makes me want to have more conversations about it. But this is not the time or place
I think you have to, if a motion's made, I think you have to vote however you think. If you think it's not ready for prime time, you need to vote that way. Others on the committee may think it's ready for prime time and we need to have this structure, so I think that's totally up to you. Senator Key.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and members of the public, I've been to 4 meetings in different groups in the last couple of weeks. And every group is putting proposals out there that they need more money. Now, at the end of the day, Dan said that there's a time when you have to make a decision. Well, that's going to happen in the legislature, and I'm sorry that we're taking a look at a budget where the income has changed, coal revenue's changed, gas has changed. We aren't getting the resources. We can't dump it on the counties. And there's proposals out there to cut their expenditures too. So when we take a look at a new proposal from one group, or the group last week, or the group last week, I'm sorry, I could not support this right now. We have to really get our mind around where we're going financially with this. I mean, it's great to have all these things provided, but there's a cost. Is it going to be federal money? Does the state have a share of that? We haven't talked about any of that. And that's the decision the legislature ends up making with the executive branch. And Dan, I hear you saying that you know, there's a day we're going to have to do it, and it's fast approaching. And frankly, I think we have to consider Mr. Gosson's proposal that let's take a look at slowing this baby down a little bit. Because we've actually done a great job coming so far. Well, now to me, we look like, after spending a lot of time in Boulder here, we're come to a proposal with, wait a minute, can we continue on to do this with the money that the state has available and with its partner, the federal government? I don't know the answer to that today.
Commissioner Miller.
Yeah, Dan, if we're going to use this as a framework for what we're going to do for crisis services, wouldn't it be prudent to do some planning on what may be necessary over here at MDC? You know, if we needed to serve 10 to 15 people over there as an example. I mean, we've talked about you know, the new crisis service array as being a pilot. If the pilot doesn't work, we're going to have some place to go with individuals. It seems to me that we should be doing at least some planning so that we've got at least that much of it done if there becomes a need to use this facility over here again, or in the event that we don't get all of this work done before the next legislative session meets, that we should at least, as part of this, do some planning for a contingency and use the existing facility.
Representative Dunwell.
I really appreciate this good discussion, and Senator Keene, welcome to our committee. I'm sort of rewinding in all of the meetings we've had, and I could be wrong, but I remember discussing repeatedly the need for crisis facilities in the community. You know, correct me if I'm wrong, and also in a keen interest, not Senator Keen interest, but a keen interest in state-run group homes. And I'm going to make a motion that we support this well-thought-out plan, Montana Developmental Disability Crisis Plan, and we we recommended as a framework to move forward addressing our crisis needs in the developmental disability community in Montana. So we recommend that we support this plan as a framework to move forward and address crisis needs of people with developmental disabilities.
Hold on, let me make sure I write this down
Yeah.
appropriately.
I think simpler the better.
Recommend we support as a framework to move forward for individuals with for crisis services for individuals with developmental disabilities. Is that accurate?
Right, and you know, groupthink is oftentimes best, so committee, any input from committee members?
Well, let's see if we have a second for the motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll give it a second to get
Okay.
it on for discussion.
Okay, it's been moved by Representative Dunwell and seconded by Mr. Briggs. Discussion on the motion. Commissioner, then Commissioner.
You know, I'd like to make an amendment and what Jim said, but down there kind of concerns me a little bit about the funding, but this plan moving forward may be a great idea, but if we don't add, if we're recommending, we need to recommend also the necessary funds to implement it. Because this plan, I mean, if you don't have no funding to go with it, I mean, what is it? How are you gonna contract with these different providers to do the work? So I just think that, and I don't know where we're at if the legislature says, you know, yeah, it's a great plan, but we're not gonna fund it. So I think we need to recommend the necessary funds to implement it in there also.
Definitely.
Absolutely, I agree.
Okay.
Thank you for catching that.
Okay, so we'll add that as a friendly amendment to Representative Representative Dunwell's. We recommend we support as a framework to move forward for crisis services for individuals with developmental disabilities and necessary funding. Is that adequate? Chaz, that good with you?
Well, I'm a little confused. It sounds like, Carl, you're saying, and we need to identify, this committee identify the funding source to pay for this? I thought I heard the chairman also reflecting that there is already discussion within the executive about some mechanism to be able to pay for this. So I guess I would assume that this passes, or if we're seriously considering it, we would want to hear back from the administration as to what ideas they're thinking of, because I'm not sure that I can pull something out of my hat at this moment in time.
Yeah, but if you don't fund it, what do you have?
Right, well, I guess, Commissioner, my thoughts on it are, if we don't fund it, we're not recommending anything. So I read Representative Dunwell's motion to say exactly what you're saying, that the recommendation is that we not only move forward with this plan and that it be funded. So that was my understanding of it.
We move forward with this plan as a framework.
Yep.
To include adequate funding to get it done well.
Okay, Commissioner.
I'd like to offer a friendly amendment too on the backup plan to be included as part of the framework. In the event everything else goes to hell, we would still be able to take care of the people that we love so much.
Okay, I'm going to pause this for a moment.
Can we take a break?
And I'm going to, Commissioner, I'm going to ask if we can treat that as a separate motion after this one.
Yeah.
That we have a plan, and assuming it passes, you have a separate motion that the executive undertake a contingency planning process.
Just as part of this document.
Yep. Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay. Fran?
She wants to take a break.
I want to take a break. You know, I sit here and going, okay, I feel like I'm having an out-of-body experience, I guess. Because like, we've been talking about crisis.
We are in a
and have
church.
this, huh?
We are in a church.
I am Catholic, so there you go. Bless me, Father. So, I guess my concern, or I guess I'm gonna go back to what I said earlier, and I think Rebecca is correct in saying, when we were talking about this, that we don't know where waiver 2 is gonna be. Waiver 2, we've already approved, and it has a funding source to it. We don't know what a funding source is, because we really don't know what a mobile crisis unit would look like. And I think it's hard to say, well, we're just gonna fund this. I think it's of how we go about, if you have waiver 2, if we really bolster the look at the community, how do we make sure that folks are stabilized within the community setting, so that we're not having another 25 coming to be recommended for MDC, as you're saying, 20 to 25. To not, I mean, again, I keep looking at what part of the, if this is approved, I guess I'm going to say, I guess an amendment to it, if this is approved or recommended from this, is there going to be a point in time to having more discussions with the providers about what this crisis services would look like or not? I guess that's my question.
I don't know that the department's ever going to not take thoughts or comments, or, I mean, it's sort of the nature of what we do. And to implement it, it will necessarily require some provider somewhere to say, I want to be a part of that plan. Here are the tweaks I need in order to make it work for my organization. Because we can't just, I mean, on behalf of MDSC, the state would never just hand you a contract and you say, yep, I'm all in, just sign it. You're going to have some refinement, you're going to have some, what about this, what about that? So I think necessarily just in the relationship that we have between the state and private providers, that will have to be a component of what
And maybe
we do.
the way they said this is a framework, that this is that can still be amended, it still can be tweaked, it still can have, so, and maybe it's not, I mean, I don't know where you're gonna have a funding within 54 days, you say you have to have the budget. I don't think in 54 days you're gonna know what the cost is, unless you guys already have a preliminary idea of the cost.
We have to have a cost plan in 54, well, 51, because it takes us a few days to write it up and get it into print. So, yeah, we absolutely have to meet that timeline.
And will this take away from the next thing on our agenda, I guess, which is?
No.
I mean, that's the, because my understanding is all these are recommendations that the committee will do and then prioritize or something or whatever.
This committee's recommendations go to Rebecca as the division administrator, then to Mary, then to Richard, then to me, then to the governor. So there's a long chain between
And then the legislature.
A and B, and then we go to the legislature, and then
and I think
they decide in their wisdom, Senator Keene, what the universe should look like.
And I think I asked earlier in our full discussions here is, once the committee comes and says, here's all the recommendations, do we then go back and prioritize what's the first need, the second need, the third need? Because they're all going to have a fiscal note to them. Waiver 2 has a fiscal note, this will have a fiscal note, the next thing on the agenda will have a fiscal note. You know,
I think it's up to the
work?
committee.
It's
totally up to the committee. Yep, Senator Keene, and then we're going to go down this side.
I would be careful what you wish for, because, and I'm talking after it goes through all the steps that Dan talked about, when it does go to the legislature, it might be, okay, let's do this, but we're going to cut some costs out to do this. So be very careful what you wish for.
Says the Vice Chairman of Finance and Claims. Let's go down this side of anything on this side?
I think it all got covered now.
Okay. The right hand has been very good today. So, before we can take any action on a matter of public interest, we have to have public comment, but it is 11:30 and we have not taken a break yet. So why don't we take a very quick 10-minute break, and then we will launch straight into public comment. We will vote on this, and I guess the only thing I would say is I have a meeting with an employee at 12:30 that I cannot miss. So we just have to appropriate our time accordingly. So we're at break for 10 minutes.
That's okay. We're going to.
As long as we have it on the tape.
Okay.
Are we all here? Missing,
He's
Bob's coming, Tara's coming, all right.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
before we have public comment, I'd like to offer a substitute motion.
Oh, my goodness, okay. I think we're 4 deep on this.
That's okay, that's all right. We have the next item on our agenda is something that we've been discussing for months. And so my motion is to consider the motion that is coming from the provider rate work group, and I can pass this out,
So,
and add the crisis plan to this motion. That's my substitute motion.
so this is too much for one motion.
I understand.
So I'll say you can make this motion subsequent to the motion that's on the table, but to include this with the crisis plan and the rates and everything, that's frankly too much. That's not a single subject.
I would like to make an amendment to my motion, though.
Okay.
And add that it takes both. We can't do one, a crisis plan, without bolstering the community provider capacity. So my motion is to support this crisis plan as a framework to move forward with adequate funding and include bolstering community providers' capacity.
Same thing.
Okay. I am making a ruling as the chair that these are 2 separate motions. They are outside of they are not related to one another. We will vote on the crisis plan, and then we will vote on the provider conversation, and
Okay.
I'm just making that ruling as the chair.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
please. Your DD Division Administrator mentioned that it's so important to bolster the capacity in the community. If we do more of that, that might change what the crisis plan looked like. Now, not in so many words, but that's what I sort of heard, that in fact they are interrelated. So,
One is the setup, and I'm not going to change my ruling on this.
Okay.
One is the establishment of the new crisis services plan. One is related to the inflation of provider rates and direct care wages and amendments to the 0208. They are very much separate and distinct. And I'm not saying that they're not complementary, and certainly people should vote their conscience on both, but for the purposes of what is within the realm of dilatory, I have to say that the implementation of new crisis services and changes to specific rate structures and 0208 waivers, they're not in my eyes related. So I'm going to rule that the substitute motion is out of order. So, yes, Carol.
So in this,
We're doing a very bad job of getting to public comment right now.
in this crisis model, it says everything that the services that are going to be provided. It does not say on there any obligations of the provider to receive this, about taking the client back, about, it says partnering with the provider, but it doesn't say the provider has an obligation to partner with this crisis. So is that going to be in there, that the provider has an obligation to partner with the crisis team, and that they have an obligation to keep the client in their home?
Well, Carol, I think that we will encourage the collaboration, and the conversation that we've had, that Dan mentioned, is how can we require the collaboration? But again, providers are their own entities, and they have the ability to agree to what they want to do and what they don't want to do.
So I thought you said at one point, though, that it would be in there, that it was understood that the client would go back to that provider. So how did you word that?
How did I word what?
Didn't you say that the client would go back to the provider?
That's ideal, assuming that the provider has the ability to safely serve the client.
Okay.
It's not a given. Sometimes the provider actually will not be able to continue to serve that client. The client may not be willing to go back to the provider.
Mr. Chair.
Let me get Tara first, and then.
So one comment and then a recommendation. From my point of view, the ability of the state to provide state-run group homes and crisis support services are the two single most integral parts of a plan moving forward without the existence of the Montana Developmental Center in place. In terms of making sure that no one falls through the cracks, we have to make sure that the state, who can't say no, has a critical role to play. And for me, those will remain my top two priorities inside and outside of this committee. Having said that, I think given the depth and nuance of the conversation around crisis services and indeed around private provider rates, my recommendation is, I think it's hard to sum up the diverse array of views that are sitting at this table in one motion. And my recommendation is that Dan and I, as representatives of the governor's office and DPHHS and OBPP staff, take back the depth of this conversation and consider it in the development of the governor's budget and in the ongoing conversations and processes that will be in place in the legislature, and that we not entertain specific motions.
Okay, Mr. Burke.
I couldn't agree more wholeheartedly. I think that's why I asked the question, was this part of the governor's planning already? I think it's a very good suggestion on Tara's part, that put it in your hands, come with a proposal that you feel is going to maximize the resources that we have and address these issues. But at this point, and I was going to mention, I'm simply not comfortable voting on it as a yes at this point. So I would wholeheartedly support what Tara's just said and recommended.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, Mr. Chair, thank you very much. I do think it speaks volumes if we, in solidarity as a committee, can recommend and have that recommendation to present to the legislature. However, in the interest of the views here, I will concede and withdraw my motion with the proviso that we make sure all of these issues are addressed, as Tara Vesey pointed out, and that we take significant, measurable, demonstrable steps to alleviate the workforce crisis and stabilize community services for the treatment and care of Montanans with developmental disabilities, which includes looking at the 0208 waiver and flexibility in staffing. All these things, if you could take that back as committee discussion, in addition to crisis services and state group homes.
Okay. The motion has been withdrawn. Any other conversation on this topic? Seeing none, let's move into private provider request for additional rate considerations. So Mr. Briggs, you had the paper, so I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Passed out, and I think there hopefully are some, I don't know if there's some additional copies. There was, and in some ways this has been described more as a resolution because there's so much of language about the provider and stakeholder rates work group has been working for really almost a year on trying to look at what is it going to really take to be able to actually address the language that's in the bill that says that this council propose a rate structure for providers and identify potential sources of funding for community-based services. Recommend community-based services necessary to allow for the closure of MDC. And so, I think you recall, there was a motion that was introduced some months ago that got into very specific language as to what should be in any kind of rate structure. But essentially, what this motion, so I guess to begin, I will move this rather lengthy motion for consideration by this advisory group today. And then I'd like to speak a little bit further to the motion specifically, but anyway, just enough of that.
So we have a motion on the floor that, I'm not going to read it, is this.
Yeah.
Hold on, let me get my vote sheet. Do we have a second?
I would second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Go ahead.
And when you pare it down, as I see all of in the language that has come, again, by committee, sometimes you get fairly lengthy descriptions that come from a committee process. But what it boils down to, really what's at the bottom of the page, points 1 and 2, really changes to the 0208 Medicaid waiver. My understanding from the administration that there's been conversation that will be a process that will begin, whether it's this fall or after the next legislative session. There's a commitment from the executive to re-examine, reevaluate the 0208 waiver. So that's a big part of, one part of this motion. Changes to the 0208 Medicaid waiver to provide flexibility in staffing and services and ensure high-quality services are provided, as well as the full use of service recipient cost plans. The nub there is about flexibility. There's been consideration about the role of a daily rate and so on. But that be at least, that's really the department work with providers to take steps necessary to change the Medicaid 0208 waiver. I think that's a fairly reasonable statement. The second part is that the administration worked with providers and stakeholders and develop a budget to the 2017 legislature to address the workforce crisis and help stabilize community services. That irrespective of MDC, that is a system that's been in crisis for some time. For the treatment and care of Montanans with developmental disabilities, looking at inflation, and as well as the importance of direct care worker wages, the direct care service professionals. That's really the essence of this motion. Changes to the 0208 waiver, as well as to work with developing a budget proposal without any specific dollars in there, as had been in the previous motion. So it's a very broad, general motion related to the rate structure and both flexibility as well as funding, which is actually part of, written into the law as to part of our responsibility as an advisory body. We had no problem right from the get-go passing a motion about the repurposing of this facility and support efforts, as well as the economic well-being of the Boulder community. I asked that we do something, that's commensurate with looking at the other side, the community-based service delivery system, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Carol.
So, meeting the goal of alleviating the workforce crisis, that's direct care staff wages, I'm assuming. But is there anything in there that says that the rate, changes in the rate or the budget goes directly to that direct care staff, or could the money or the budget go anywhere? I mean, how do, I guess, I'm assuming this is asking for more money to alleviate, to help community services do a better job. And how do we know that that is going towards the alleviating the workforce crisis, I guess? Is that implied here, or am I missing something? Because meeting the goal of stabilizing community services is very vague. I don't know what that means. I understand alleviating workforce crisis. And so with the budget proposals, are they going to be directed towards direct care staff? Or is that in here, or applied somewhere?
Mr. Chairman, you want me to address that as best I can? I know in the senior long-term care division with the Medicaid waiver there, the legislature has appropriated really biennium after biennium direct dollars to go for direct care worker wages, whether it's in community-based services or nursing homes. And this is a process that has been handled and reviewed by the executive, both in the interim finance committee, looking at the follow-through and how how those obligations are played out. that the providers make a commitment for the use of those dollars, that it goes to wages. So
that is happening right now with long-term care. Does it happen with DD?
no, DD.
Is this
Mr.
asking
Chairman,
for that to happen?
That's what it's asking.
This is asking for that same
Right, the
process
same
to
thing that has
happen?
happened in senior and long-term care, Medicaid system, to be also in Developmental Services Division, funding for cost plans and related to provider rates. So it's actually saying that really what is happening currently in senior and long-term care, with a focus on direct care worker wages, also be applied to Developmental Service Division programs.
Mr. Chair, I would add, this is a recommendation that this issue exists. We have repeatedly heard community providers tell this committee about the crisis in recruitment and retention because providers are not able to pay competitive living wages. We know wonderfully in Montana, because of some of the work of the governor, we have a very low unemployment rate. The downside is we're facing a workforce shortage. We have heard Fran say she has her wonderful facility, that's a great place to work, has 37 vacancies. It's a revolving door. We don't have the capacity. We're trying to deinstitutionalize in order to prevent dumping. We need to build the capacity. That's what this is asking for.
Commissioner Muller?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question I think probably for Rebecca, you know, in looking at the recommendations here, number one, I'm wondering what that delta would cost between what the contracted rate is and what they're currently drawing down on their contracts. Do you have any idea what that amount would, what the aggregate of that would be?
Costing this number one out?
Yeah.
I think that that's been done by MACD's, has it not?
May I?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, actually the state came up with that number for us, and my recollection is that it might be something like $1.9 million or something like that is sitting on the table. But the state did calculate it, so, and I'm trying to do it off memory. I'm not going to do that, I guess. It has been figured out, though.
Why don't you see if you can check your emails and whatnot to see if you can find anything. Commissioner, other commissioner.
Yeah. I don't know quite how to put this for sure, but as you know, I represent the mental health side, and you know, last time we had a specific number, and I think this is asking for the department to work with providers to come up with some kind of a number. And I will, you know, probably vote for this time, but I'm glad we've got senators and representatives in the room, Representative Wagner and Senator Keenan. This is not just a specific provider problem. I mean, this is a statewide problem that needs to be fixed. And I know that you folks are under tremendous pressure this year because just what Senator Keenan said, and I sympathize with the legislature this year in meeting all the requests. But I'm going to vote for it because I think that maybe I'm hoping that it'll open the door to look at all the provider rating structures rather than just individualizing.
Senator Keene, and then Tara.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The last proposal there were things spelled out specific we could take a look at. This proposal is saying, hey, just trust us, give us a bunch more money. And we don't know what the number is. We heard 1.9, is it 2, is it 3, is it 4? I'm not voting for this one because this proposal should be presented to the legislature. Not, this committee should, in my opinion, as a member of this committee shouldn't be deciding what provider rates are all over the state. At least recommending, I just can't buy this one at all. And I don't, does anybody have a number?
We're working on it.
We're working on the number for number one.
Thank you.
Yep, Tara?
So in the interest of consistency, particularly given for me the personal importance of the motion that was on the table before as a policy proposal, I mean, I'd recommend again.
Hold on.
Excuse us.
Excuse me. Tara, go ahead.
In the interest of consistency with my previous recommendation, I don't feel comfortable having not voted on what I see as a critical element of the piece of the puzzle moving forward, and then voting on this critical piece. I think I'd repeat my recommendation that we've heard a lot of great testimony, we've had a lot of great discussion, of intense depth and nuance on what is an incredibly complex and complicated package of policies moving forward. And I don't feel comfortable voting on this motion today, particularly in light of not having moved forward on the previous motion.
Representative Wagner?
Mr. Chair, in light of what previous people have said, I agree with what Tara says. When we have a more specific plan, as we discussed previously, a more specific framework with more specific numbers, it'll be easier to support these. Although this is generally broad and is already what you guys are probably doing anyways without a recommendation, I would expect that that's what's going to happen in the budget office anyways. But until we have a concise plan, or at least a concise framework, as we called it, with all the legs there and the numbers and specifics, I would also support not supporting this at this time.
Okay, thank you. Representative Dunlop?
I wonder what you all would think about this. We, as a committee, are charged with recommending improvement. Tara just said we have a complicated package of public policies, or something like that. I would like to introduce a substitute motion to add to Charlie's that we recommend addressing the continuum of need, including the need for a crisis plan, using the department's crisis plan as a framework, state-run group homes, and methods to bolster community-based facilities so that they can pay their people a decent living wage. And the needs, treatment needs of people with developmental disabilities are met.
I'm not going to change the ruling. They're two very distinct and different motions. And combining them isn't going to get us any further toward a conclusion. So the substitute motion is out of order. Representative Wagner?
I just want to kind of remind everyone that even though we have specific requirements set out in the Senate bill, but we mustn't forget that the most important thing is taking care of the people in there, like Carol's son and stuff. So we really need to remember to keep our eye on that ball. That's the real purposes committee, make sure that they're taking care of the most. Everything else is secondary.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, we'll have
I'd like
public,
to
yeah.
just close on my motion.
Oh, well, we got to do public comment. Then
Okay,
we can
all right,
close.
okay, right.
So, public comment on this motion.
My name is Jan Anderson. I'm the editor and publisher of the Boulder Monitor, and I'm just here to bring up what I believe is a point of the public's right to know. This motion is very lengthy, was not even available in written copies to most of the people here, and I think it's probably premature without people out here being able to read it to be able to vote on this motion.
Thank you, Jan. Further public comment?
Mr. Chairman and committee members, I'm Rose Hughes, the Executive Director of the Montana Association of Community Developmental Disability Services. This is really probably the last chance, sounds like, for this committee to say something about the community providers. The community providers have been here at every meeting. They've told you about their issues and concerns. They've told you how difficult it is to hire staff. They've told you how they close group homes because they can't staff them. They've told you how they don't accept people into services because they can't hire the staff. And so, and part of the legislation was in fact to say something about community services and community providers, and I think this is your last chance to do it. We did bring a pretty specific proposal in the past. It was very specific. It was exactly, you know, it was exactly what we think is needed to get the job done, and it had a very high price tag on it. We suggested that we need $5 a day in wages to pay the people who do this difficult work. And people on the committee, perhaps rightfully, perhaps not, but it was the committee's discretion to say, we just can't grab a hold of that and say, go do that exact thing. So we've come back to you with something that's general, and now there's a little bit of concern about how general it is. But the reason it's general is because we think this committee should say something about the community providers, something that I think you'd be really remiss in not, perhaps not really doing your job if you didn't say something about these community services. You know, you've heard the department say, in effect, we're going to force the community providers to take people back that they might not be able to take care of. And so the community providers are involved in this. We have a big stake, and we want to be a part of the solution. We want to help to the extent that we can provide services. We want to provide them. To the extent we can't, you need state services that can assure that every individual who needs this type of service gets it. But I think what we're asking you to do here, and the reason it's general, is because we would just like you to make a statement that says, we understand that the community providers are in trouble. We understand they're having workforce issues that are incredible. We understand that, and we know that something needs to be done, but we're not sure. We're not, as a group, we can't tell you exactly. We can't tell you if $1 an hour is going to get the job done or if $10 an hour is going to get the job done. But it's just a statement that says, we think something should be done, and we would like to make sure, as a group, we would like to make the recommendation that something happen. Obviously, the executive still has the ability to look at that recommendation in conjunction with everything else the executive looks at, and to prioritize it and say, you know, this committee thought this was a good idea, but they're not looking at as many different things as we're looking at. We've got so many problems that we don't know what to do with. And so it doesn't stop the executive from doing whatever it is that they think is best when all is said and done. But it just says that this group of people who were charged with looking at just this issue, the executive has to look at a lot of issues, we understand that. This committee is looking at MDC and DD and the relationships and how you serve people. And so we'd like this committee to say to the administration, take a good hard look at workforce, take a good hard look at these community providers, and do your best to make a proposal to the next legislature that will help get something done. And that's all it is. It's not a requirement. You know, you pass this motion, you're not going to spend a dime. It is still with the administration to figure out if they have a dime and how they're going to spend the dime they have. So we understand that, but we just think it's so important for this group, after listening to the providers and understanding all of the problems and knowing that there are thousands of people out there. You know, we've talked a lot about the 50 or so that receive services, you know, at MDC, but there are 2,700 people receiving DD services out in the community. And the workforce shortages affects all of them. It's not about 50 people. It's about serving people with developmental disabilities. So I really hope you'll take a good look at this and be able to support it as a minimal statement of your concern about the issue.
So just before Ken steps up, we have a number, it's 1.9 million for the first portion of the amendment. Is just for group home services. It'd be somewhere between 1.9 and $7 million for that first bullet, depending on which services were covered. So that's your ballpark, 1.9 to 7 would be the world.
Excuse me. With that, could I say something?
No,
Because,
we need to move on. Ken, go ahead.
Ken,
Thank
there's
you.
no amount of money in the motion.
Okay, so last week, the 11th through the 17th was National Direct Support Professional Week. And so we kind of have an idea of what folks do there, but, and it is broad-based. It's folks that work in nursing homes, it's people who work with mental health, it's people that, that obviously work in this system. So for our system, you know, it's direct care staff are finding people jobs, they're coaching them in those jobs so they can maintain them. They're at home, they're doing their meals, they're shopping, they're doing their budgeting, they're doing their banking, transportation, recreation, social interaction, house cleaning, and personal hygiene. So there's a lot of things that go into enabling people with disabilities to be members of the community. And if you don't have those things, then they are just sitting in homes or they're going to work, but they're not really members of the community. So it takes direct support professionals to do that. There's not enough caregivers. So why is that? Well, there's high turnover rate because we're paying $10 an hour. We have a larger aging population. There's fewer people that are of the age that can do these jobs. There's lower, well, there's closure of MDC, so there's more people coming into community. There's more people coming from youth services that are going to be in adult services. In 2022, coming up, American Association of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities note that 1 million more direct support professionals will be needed. So that's a big number, but, and maybe it doesn't mean that much, but right now we have a crisis. And when we talk about preventative, the crisis is the system we have now could fall apart. It could collapse. And right now we have 41 shift openings, which is 30-some FTE. MDSC has similar numbers. REACH in Bozeman has similar numbers. Those are similar numbers across this state. And we're just not paying enough. So we'd like to see that the benefits increase. So nearly half of the DSPs in the United States are on public benefits. So our staff are experts in food stamps and WEA because they get them. They know how to do it. So this isn't money I'm asking for myself. I'm not going to get a dime of this. And so it needs to go towards the people who are really doing the job. So if you want to do preventative, we can have all the crisis things you want. If you don't have the staff to carry it out, it doesn't matter. You can have PhDs or whatever, it doesn't matter. You can't do it. So let's talk about George a little bit. I've been talking about him. So, you know, George has started out in their Bellcrest home. He attacked a staff. The police were involved. Why was that? Did we call them? When you go to the hospital with a bite, they're mandatory to call the police. That's how the police get involved. And then so why is George not at Bellcrest? He was court ordered not to go there. So we had to find a place for him. So we moved him to another home, and he bit a client and staff there. And so again, he goes to court. He was court ordered not to be there. So he was in a motel, Super 8. They did a great job for about 3 months. And we had staff with him 24 hours a day. So he's sleeping. We have staff awake, 2 staff in a motel room with him That was their job. And we had talked months before that about trying to get him into an apartment, and with the limitations of SSI, it's hard to get a person in a place by themselves. We did do that. He's in an apartment by himself now. He just been another staff. So, you know, we have some difficult people out there. We're paying our staff to work with him $12 an hour. I think we're losing money, but that's what we need to do because we cannot get people to work with George. They don't want to take the risk. So we do need to pay people for some incentives in working with this difficult population. We got a fast food place just opened up in Missoula on their marquee, $12 an hour they're paying. And so our guys are $10 an hour, and so, you know, they're leaving. So every Monday we sit there and we put all the days of the week across, all our services there, and then we identify what's the minimum number to keep those places safe. And it's not to hit our time and effort that we get the bonus if we hit 92.5. It's what do we need to keep that place safe. And we go through there and then we're pulling people from different places. We're doing overtime. We have a hierarchy of who's going to go in and work. And as of Monday, I have at least 5 places where I don't have enough staff to meet basic safety needs. And that's not uncommon. That's where we're at. So when you're looking at this, all it's saying is let's support direct care staff. They need an increase in wages. You know, from the legislature, they'll decide what that's going to be. But we have to start somewhere, and if we can't even say we need to increase this, I think that's...
Senator Representative.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'd like to speak specifically about...
Eve, would you just do the on the record, for the record thingy?
Oh,
I'm
yes.
sorry.
Thank
A lot
you.
of people may not know who
Thank you. I thought I was infamous. For the record, my name is Eve, E-V-E, Franklin, F-R-A-N-K-L-I-N. I just want to speak to the money part of Charlie's motion. We had talked about item number 1, that it was 1.9 million, but that's total funds. So actually, general fund, it's only 750,000. The rest would be Medicaid matching. So as far as general fund, that's only 750,000. And if we look at number 2, the qualifier there is providers and stakeholders with the department will develop a budget proposal. And we all know the limitations of a budget proposal. As the previous speaker, Rose Hughes, said, if it's a dime, we'd have to look at the dime and where it goes. You know, there may only be a dime, but at least to look at, with the appropriate stakeholders, to look at what the budget will bear, given this concept. So I urge the committee to support the motion, considering that additional information. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Cheryl Hassacker, and I'm not with the state or anybody else. I'm just a local person that has a personal interest in these individuals that you guys are taking in consideration on your plan. Please forgive me, it is very personal, just like it is for Carol. It is what it is. Due to politics, it was rammed through, and you guys have a hard choice and decision and recommendations in front of you. And so I wouldn't want to be in your shoes because I have a hard time speaking my mind. But it is what it is. I just ask you guys even though you guys are set that you have to have your decision done and your recommendations or whatever by a certain time, please pressure to slow down. Because the reality is, and I know it's frustrating for me because it is on a personal level. I know what it's like for these group homes and these community group homes. They don't have the staff. So who suffers in the long run? It's the residents. They are the ones that suffer. If they don't have the staff to be able to go out for the day, they stuck in the house. And it's not fair to them. The main problem out in the community group homes is not only the staffing, which I believe it was you, I'm sorry, that brought that up, but also the training. They're not getting the training. And who pays for the training? The individual. It comes out of their cost plan, which means if it comes out of their cost plan, that means that's less that they get on care. And I know that on a personal level because I fight almost on a daily basis under the system for somebody I care for. And that's just the reality of it is. So I understand this proposal on the money because their cost plans don't cover the training that they need so that the staff knows how to deal and how to communicate and how to take care of some of these individuals, because it's different from those that cannot be cured and those that can be helped and can be put out into the community. And then there's the reality is they'll never be able to be out on their own, and they don't understand. They don't have the mental capacity to understand a lot of things. So they can't take care of themselves. So that's something you guys need to remember to keep in mind. There's two different kinds here. And as far as this crisis center, I'm frustrated because the sample that was brought forward is almost everything. It's duplicating everything what we have. And the sad thing that is on this crisis center, training on the staffing is going to prevent a lot of those crises, because I see it on a personal level. Because the staff are coming and going all the time, and you just get one group staff trained and then they're out the door, and it's frustrating for everybody involved because it's constantly, and I know wages has a lot to do with it too, but just please keep in consideration, and I can't stress enough to please slow down this. It was rushed through, rammed through, and I think we need to slow down. And I know you guys are on pressure things, but you know what? Let's do it right. Let's take care of who really counts. I've done a lot of research in this whole thing, and all the states that has done this and has made this decision, they've tried doing these crisis things, and in the meanwhile, who suffers? It's the individuals that we're talking about. They fall through the cracks, and over 68% of them either end up in jail, on the street, or dead, or in the prisons. And I just don't want to see that to any of our Montana people. So please take into consideration to slow this down and really think this through before you make any recommendation. And they are right. You do need to consider the providers in their payment plan, because it costs money to train, and it costs money to train staff. Because you're constantly, you're talking training the staff about every 3 months. That's how the revolving door goes. And that is costly. So please slow this down. And I know you guys are restrained, but you got to think of the people that you guys are doing it for, instead of just the bureaucracy stuff. Please. Thank you.
Next.
My name is Brent Yeager. I am the president of the Montana Developmental Center RN Association 5133. I ask that you bear with me. This isn't in regards to the subject matter that's being done, but it does have to do with the planning and the transition and drawdown as far as the closure.
So, Mr. Yeager, we've got a general public comment. This is just public comment on the motion. So if you could wait till we get done
Okay.
with this motion, then we'll have public comment
Okay.
on all topics.
Okay.
Thanks, Brent, sorry. So I guess I should say that for everybody. This section of the public comment is just relative to the motion by Mr. Briggs. It's not generic public comment on all things under the committee's purview. So I say that, please come on up if it's on this motion.
Okay, yes, it is.
Great, thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen of the committee and Mr. Chairman, first I'd like to say thank you for the work that you guys have done.
Can you identify yourself, please?
Yes, I will. My name's Jean Morgan, and I work for Westmont, a community provider agency in Helena. And I would ask that you support the motion. Again, just to reiterate what's already been brought up by Fran and by Ken, we have between 30 and 40 openings at any given time. And we could not do what we do without the direct care staff that we have. And continuing with the revolving door of training and being able to prevent crisis is hard when you have staff that don't understand and recognize a crisis is starting to begin with. And a lot of that has to do with the consistency and the continuity of staffing for them to be able to know people's triggers and things that people need in order to stay stable. So we see all the time problems that arise that could have been avoided had we been able to maintain staff and be able to provide an opportunity for people to do this as a career and not feel that they have to move on because they can't afford to stay. So it's really important that we identify part of the crisis plan is maintaining community provider staffing and making sure that people are safe and can work with folks that understand what their needs are so that they can prevent crisis. So thank you for considering the motion. Appreciate it.
In the absence of the chairman, members of the committee, my name is Mike Mahoney, M-A-H-O-N-E-Y, Mr. Acting Mr. Chairman. It's M-A-H-O-N-E-Y. I just want to kind of encapsulate some things that are of great concern to me as the director of the program. Prior to the inception of Senate Bill 411, there were issues with provider rates. I think Senate Bill 411 has exacerbated that need. And I think it was Representative Wagner who probably said it best a minute ago. I think your real charge as a committee is to look at what's in the best interest of the people that we're trying to serve with developmental disabilities. And I can tell you, I think the common denominator through this whole process is the community providers and our ability to recruit and retain quality people. And that has permeated, I think, this whole process, and I would strongly encourage you to not lose track of that. What we're trying to do is provide quality services to the people that we serve. Senator Keenan, I've always known as a man of his word. When he said, be careful what you ask for, I take that to heart. I think that's an important concept for you guys to remember, that if it means that money has to be looked at from a different angle to say, well, if we're going to provide this, we've got to take something else out. I don't know what that would be. I leave that to someone as learned as the good senator about the legislative process. He's done that for quite some time. But I do think it's important enough to say that should be still considered as part of the package that you guys look at. Another question came up, how can we ensure that the money would go to that? He can make that a restricted appropriation to say this is the only thing this money can be used for as an example to ensure that integrity. But I assure you, community programs need to be a part of what you look at, because without the things that programs do, whether it's mine or somebody else's, I think it's going to have a direct impact because of the passage of Senate Bill 411. Without community-based programs, be very cautious. You don't put yourself in a position to have these services provided by state-run programs. Not to impugn the integrity of state-run programs. I'm fairly familiar and have a little experience with that process. I think they do a great job. But there's also a time and a place to have private nonprofits, and I think we fit into this equation very well, and you really want to make sure that you take care of those kind of programs and ensure that the rate structure is adequate for us to recruit and retain quality people, because that has a direct impact on the kind of services that we're able to provide for the people we serve. And that's really what I think it all comes back to. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the committee's time.
Thank you. Other public comment? Other public comment? Just on the motion still. Third final time, no other public comment. All right, we are back to the committee for discussion. Representative Wagner.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, public. Just to be clear, I'm not opposed to anything that this motion says. And as Rose said, there's no dollar amounts in here, but we do know that there is a dollar amount going to be involved, whether it's $750,000 general fund or up to the $7 million number that was thrown around. But also right is what Jan had said. This is a significant motion that should be made out to the public beforehand, and having dealt with those types of situations before, it's good that the public be able to read these beforehand and bring them before us before we make a vote on this. We all know that there's a problem with the payment and billing and services and that whole process to get the right amount of money. You can't access the total amount of money that's available for a client. That's what needs to be fixed. I don't have anything against what this motion says, but we still need to, the rest of the committee and the public needs to simmer on it before we vote.
Thank you. Representative Eaton. I just promoted you.
Is it a promotion?
That is not a promotion. Trust me.
Can I speak to that?
Tara.
Mr. Chair, I am, a couple of statements. One is, I have just an incredible amount of respect that has only grown over time for the private community providers that have been a part of this process. And Fran in particular, you know, your life's work, which I know is what it is inspiring and humbling. And I take all of you at your word at the on the challenges that have existed and continue to exist, and appreciate wholeheartedly the work that you do every day to serve by far the majority of developmentally disabled people that that the state helps care for. I mean, 2,700 compared to the roughly 60 that we were talking about at MDC. And I want to make that, you talked a lot about statements, and so I want to make that statement clear. For me, what brought us to this table and this room was the closure of MDC. And the closure of MDC leaves in jeopardy 60 individual people and the roughly 25 a year that had been placed there and would have continued to be placed there. And so when I think about the immediate life-altering priorities, when I think about the priorities that this committee, the executive, and the legislature are going to have to deal with, it is about that narrow population that has been served at MDC, and knowing that we don't have limited resources or just as importantly, limited time. I mean, that we have limited time for discussion and research and DPHHS staff. The moral and ethical obligation for me at this moment in time is for those very, very acute services that had been provided to a very high need population at MDC. And so I apologize for the long statement. I want to be clear. I'm going to be voting no against this motion. It's not because I don't recognize the importance of the work that is done by the community providers or the challenges that they face. It's because it's because the very, very specific and very serious obligation that's immediately in front of this committee is for a very narrow population that I think we have an obligation to deal with first.
Representative Dunlop.
Thank you. I agree with Tara. We have an obligation to deal with it first. I also feel we need to look at the whole, because all of these little pieces put together are greater than the sum of the parts. I think if we deal with the continuum, recommend we address the continuum from state group homes, crisis facilities, enhancing community-based capacity, I think the result will be greater than the sum of its parts and result in a synergy of system improvement. So I don't think we can separate them into little pieces. I think we have to look at them as a whole. But having said that, I am going to vote yes because it moves us in that direction. And we do need to address the continuing problem in the community of a lack of staffing.
Sure. Carol.
So when SB 411 was passed, Beth Brenneman said that the problem, it boils down to a rate problem. She was asked that by Representative Harris. This boils down to a rate problem. This bill, SB 411, will force that to be solved. This is a dispute about, another statement was this bill is the only vehicle to force a rate increase for the providers. So as far as I can see, MDC was closed to get us to where we are today to force some kind of rate increase. I realize we're not forcing anything, but, and then in the motion itself, it says that these recommendations assure that people with disabilities have real choices about where they will receive their services. Well, I agree that community and providing community services are ideal for clients, but they don't work for everyone. George should be in an ICF IID in the state of Montana. We have no services like that anymore. It's been decided that they will be out of state. Even though when this bill was before the legislature, the whole chant was people need to be served in their communities, they need to be in their communities. Now, those people who are best served in congregate care in such as an ICF IID facility are going to be put out of state. I'm very conflicted on this motion. However, I know Rob Talon and Bozeman, he pays $13 an hour, still can't find staff. I know Kim Brown, I know Fran, Mike Sadowski, and as a parent of a developmentally disabled adult, it's sort of a no-brainer that you've got to have direct care staff throughout the system. So I will be voting an angry yes on this motion.
Other comments? I guess, for what it's worth, I will be abstaining from this motion. I don't have the luxury of governing by anecdote, and when I walk into the governor's office, I have to present him data. So I've spent the last few days going over the desk audits of providers and what the actual finances are. One of them here today, over $500,000 in net increased revenues over the last 3 years. Another one, $1.26 million in above FDIC insured cash on hand, debt down 26%, 3.5 months of total operating cash. Another one, $269,000 in cash above FDIC insured limits, increase of $370,000 in net assets for the last fiscal year. Another one, $3.6 million in net income increase for 1 year, with $71,000 above FDIC insurance limits. Another one, 19% increase in cash on hand. So, for me, we didn't vote on a crisis plan. I see data like this, which the legislature will certainly be taking into consideration as they make a determination on whether or not rates should be increased, and you have folks with $1.2 million cash on hand with 3.5 months of operating reserves. I don't see how I could make a recommendation on this when we have the remainder of the plan outstanding. So I will be abstaining. Mr. Briggs, would you like to close on your motion?
I'll be very brief. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for I think what's been certainly a long conversation about provider rates from varying different points of view. Actually, this committee has been hearing about this for probably since the very early part of the meeting, so that we began meeting. So essentially a year or more. A lot of details, whether it's anecdotal or in general trends, the cost of being able to pay for people. I think I have to, Jan's comment, which was raised, I'm not sure that we're going to move to a place, I mean, this pared down motion that Mrs. Hughes addressed was trying to bring, quite simply, a statement about working together to address the workforce crisis and the various pieces and components of that. This is a much more muted, I think conciliatory motion that was circulated to the members of the committee, I think at least for a week. I don't know that we're going to start publishing or be required to publish proposed motions in advance of meetings. But I think you pare it down to really all that it's saying is about the administration working together with providers to try to address the crisis, the workforce crisis in community services, which is part and parcel and necessary in terms of working with the population that's MDC or that would otherwise be coming to MDC. Certainly crisis intervention is of necessity, part of that, and it has to be addressed and resolved. But I ask for support of this motion, Mr. Chairman.
All right. I'm going to anticipate a roll call vote on this one. Commissioner Mullen.
Yes.
Commissioner Seelstad.
Yes.
Mr. Burke.
No.
Mary Dalton abstains. Carol.
Yes.
Diana.
Yes.
Senator Keene.
No.
Representative Wagner.
No.
Tara.
Abstain.
Fran.
Yes.
Deb.
She votes yes.
Senator Thomas.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I can show you the email.
No, that's fine. Charlie.
Yes.
Representative Dunwell.
Yes.
And I abstain. Motion passes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 2, 3. All right. Conclusion of our regular agenda. We will now move into public comment on 80 items under the committee's purview. So please step up to the podium, say your name, what organization you're representing, and give us your comment. I guess I'll break here again. Representative Eli, are you here yet? Representative Eli? No? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I texted him earlier. He said he couldn't make it.
Oh, okay. Just checking. All right, public comment, please. Just step to the podium.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, it feels like it's been a long time since we talked about it, but it was wonderful to see the state's framework for, oh, I didn't say my name. Beth Brenneman from Disability Rights Montana, excuse me, for the framework for the crisis system. Of course, it's been something that we've been wanting to see for a while. It does have the elements of other plans that have been successful in other states, and we look forward to having it fleshed out. We do want to remind, of course, people that the O208 waiver only has a very limited number of emergency slots, and so if we're going to wait to amend it, which I think we are until May, we're not going to. We don't have very many left. I don't know how many we had. We only had 20 to begin with. and the emergency definition is quite narrow. And I think this committee, if it's going to meet again, really needs to talk about what that definition needs to look like in order to ensure that people that don't have services now, when they're facing criminal charges, et cetera, are diverted into the DD system instead of going into the correctional system. But we're very happy to see the work that you've done. A little disappointed that you didn't have a vote, but I'm sure that the governor's representatives will bring it back to the office. So, thank you.
Mr. Yeager, why don't you come on up? Sorry I wasn't clear.
That's okay. My name is Brent Yeager. I am the president of MDC's RN Association, Local 5133 MEAMFT. I'm kind of reaching out to the committee, the chairman and the committee, regarding staffing issues also. So that seems to be kind of the theme of the day. You know, with your workforce planning and transition and closure planning and transition, and I expect a drawdown of nurses and stuff as the clients are placed. However, in the past 3 weeks, we have lost 3 nurses, 4 weeks. And one of those, well, we almost lost 4. One of them put in resignation, rescinded it, and has continued to work. Another one put in a resignation and then attempted to rescind it and was told when he put in his rescission that MDC appreciated his service over the years, that they are obligated to follow their procedure and not to accept the request to rescind his resignation, and wished him best in any of his endeavors. When we asked the acting superintendent that was covering, she said that no such policy exists at MDC and sent us to HR Deb Sloat. And Deb Sloat was not able to provide us with a policy or procedure that said that, just said that it's past practice. And in my 15 years there, the past practice has been that they allow this. And over the 15 years, it's happened repeatedly. I listened to what was said by the Westmont person, provider that got up here and talked about having staff that read the client's behavior and the triggers and everything else. And the person that is the subject of this is an excellent RN. And we can't afford those kind of losses. And just passing on, bringing them back. So I'd ask you, if you have any influence over this, to attempt to get some answers for us. And I would ask that you help us to maintain safe staffing levels while this transition is being accomplished. Thank you.
Thank you. Further public comment?
I'm Sabrina Steckety. I live here in Boulder. Just a couple things. I want to thank you guys all for your work, and especially for the discussion today, which was really rich and really focused on the needs of the folks, not just at MDC, but that we're serving across the state. My dad, a superintendent in the 60s, also served at MDC in later decades, and always talked about, I mean, in every decade, and then when he was retired and living with us, about the difficulty of getting the funding from the state level to adequately serve our folks with developmental disabilities across the state. And based on the information that I learned from him over the years and others involved in this area, I think it's safe to say that the state of Montana has never adequately funded the care of our folks with developmental disabilities. And so even though I really still think Senate Bill 411 was misguided, if it has led to this robust discussion of what we need to do for these folks from the state level, including adequate funding, then I guess I just want to thank you for bringing that small silver lining to what was otherwise really, really awful. I also want to just call attention back to what Drew Dawson read you earlier, the request from the transition team to consider extending the deadline for closing MDC 2 years. I'm just looking at the list of the really great things that you guys are proposing to do, which is maintaining the ASU as an STF, adding another one in eastern Montana, adding the 50 count waiver 2, increasing current provider rates, adding and maintaining a mobile crisis team, adding state group homes, adding a crisis line, training and supporting your community-based psych service providers. You know, when I'm just kind of doing that on my fingers, I think we're looking easily at doubling the cost of what we've got here. And I know, Dan, you were reluctant to give a figure, but if we're at 13 million for MDC right now, I think you guys are looking at least double, and I think maybe that's even conservative. So the idea that we're going to try and do all of these wonderful things in the remaining 8 months and try and get $13 or $20 million to do it just does not seem realistic to me. And giving ourselves the safe space of 24 months to carry out this pilot plan, try and find funding, just makes tremendous sense to me, and I would really urge the committee to make that a focus of any recommendation that you propose going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabrina. Any other public comment?
Lynn Price, Boulder resident, thank you. I just would like to remind you of my interest in having the Rural Institute of Montana Research and Training Center on Disability in rural communities. Professor at U of M recently received the Distinguished Alumni Award, and I'm sure Rebecca's been using a lot of that research, but it really supports the importance of direct care staff, of not only wages and benefits, but training ladders so that it can be a profession and not a revolving door. And I think it's great that there has been an intern from Rural Institute on staff, and I just encourage everyone to become more familiar with their research. There's tons of helpful information, what's happened in other places, what best practices are, and it's been done. And Tom Seekins is just the history of his contributions are worth knowing about in your work. Thank you.
Thank you. Other public comment? Any other public comment? Third and final time? All right, seeing no further public comment. We are done with our agenda and only 57 minutes behind schedule. So committee members, there is, yeah.
Are we going to have another meeting? I think there were several things brought up, and I don't know the process well enough, but there was the additional 2 years that was brought up. There was a backup plan brought up by Commissioner Mullen. The status of the facility, and I remember talking about this early on, about checking deeds to see what could be done, and I don't know if we ever seen that, the outcome of that or whatever, and I'm just wondering if we need to go over some of those things. I know you're really busy with budgets and all.
I guess basically this is the last meeting we have before I have to start getting recommendations in. We're basically out of daylight on anything with a dollar sign attached to it. It's 50, like I said, 53 days out. The next time, let's subtract 30 of that for another meeting. You're 23 days out. I think from a general update perspective, I can get most of that to the committee. It's really whatever the committee thinks would be useful. You know, we continue to, and our commitment stands to work through Mr. Dawson and the BTEC group on repurposing, and we've laid those markers out that any repurposing effort will not be proceeding forward unless the community signs off. And they actually have a, I'll call it a measuring stick, a statement of what the community will and will not accept as far as repurposing of the facility, and that's what we're using as we analyze what things look like. So I'd say if it involves a dollar sign, there's probably not much we can do after this meeting, but I throw it open to the committee of, do we need to get together again? Should we not? What's everybody's thoughts?
And I was just curious.
Yeah.
Because there were several things brought up.
Well, I don't think we're done. I would like to meet again. I would like to discuss Drew's and Sabrina's thoughts about expanding the time frame a little bit in order to do things well. I would also like to revisit the discussion about simply recommending state-run group homes in a crisis capacity.
Anybody else? Mr. Burke, thoughts?
Down there first, then back to me.
I think there's things left to discuss for sure. I do worry about the timeline getting close to the election and legislature. It's the timeline issue has been a concern of mine since the beginning. I've expressed it, almost every
Passionately?
meeting. Except for this one, I hadn't brought it up yet.
I brought it up for you.
Thank you. But I think that would be well worth meeting again if that was to be part of the discussion, to talk about the realism of what's gone on. I think the status report you gave today is positive, that there is potential in getting people placed, but the reality is that to do it all within the next year is still going to test the limits of the department and the administration, and we should be thinking about that and weighing in on that if we all agree that that's the truth.
Bob?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In light of what Eric just said, I too am concerned, that we're going to run out of time. We've got a lot to accomplish before June 30th of 17, and I would really like us to have a discussion at some point to talk about the notion of extending this for 2 years. It may be something that we don't have any choice about. We may have to do that. So again, it's kind of back to that backup plan. I'd like to have a discussion.
Representative Wagner?
I think we should have one more meeting to try and figure out where we want to go, and even possible legislation that Senator Representative Keene or me or Senator Representative Dunwell, I almost demoted you to Senator, are going to have to do the heavy lifting on as the Vice Chair of the House Human Services Committee. So,
Well, why don't we plan on one last
hopefully
final
chair.
meeting? I'm just going to be honest, I don't know how we do it before November 15th on executive budget. So I maybe a meeting shortly thereafter, and we can go over November 15th submission and then have the big vote of the committee on, do we go another 2 years, do we not, things like that. Because we have through December 15th to do executive budget revisions. So why don't we plan on whatever that fourth Thursday of November is. No, that's Thanksgiving.
Can we do it early December like we did last year? Early December meeting?
Could we do third week of No. I'll send an email around. We'll find sometime late November, early December to get together before January.
Schedule this one.
That's
Yeah.
the idea, to come back.
Okay.
fresher.
If everybody would please let committee members grab a bite to eat before they do, that would be appreciated. We're adjourned.